Chapter 259. True Fire Weapon Workshop. Elder Zhang sat in the back hall, frowning as he looked at the accounts of the recent transactions. Gu Yong stood below with his head bowed, silent and fearful. Why is it that the number of middle-grade spirit weapons has increased recently but superior-grade spirit weapons have decreased? Elder Zhang asked in a deep voice. Gu Yong hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop. Fufu." Before Gu Yong could finish, Elder Zhang chuckled. "I've already said that Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop will definitely close down within half a year. Seems like it's as I expected." In Elder Zhang's opinion, it must be because Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop closed down that the number of cultivators coming to True Fire Weapon Workshop to order middle-grade spirit weapons increased. Gu Yong had an awkward expression. "Why? Is there something wrong?" Elder Zhang could not help but frown when he saw Gu Yong's odd expression. Gu Yong replied honestly, "Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop did not close down. It's just that they no longer refine middle-grade spirit weapons and changed to superior-grade ones." Elder Zhang's expression changed slightly as he asked, "Isn't Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop unable to refine superior-grade spirit weapons? Why is it suddenly possible?" "I don't know either." Gu Yong shook his head. Pondering for a moment, Elder Zhang asked again, "What's his price?" Gu Yong replied, 3,000 superior-grade spirit stones. Elder Zhang was enlightened and could not help but scoff coldly. "It's no wonder why they stole our business when the price is so low. Pass down the order that from today onwards, the price of all superior-grade spirit weapons in True Fire Weapon Workshop will be changed to 3,000 superior-grade spirit stones as well." "This?" Gu Yong hesitated. "Why are you stuttering?" Elder Zhang berated. "Speak if you have something to say." Gu Yong cupped his fists. "Elder Zhang, forgive me for being direct. Even if we lower the price to 3,000 superior-grade spirit stones, we won't be able to compete with Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop." "Why? You don't believe in my weapon refinement standards?" Elder Zhang's gaze narrowed with anger. Gu Yong said softly, "Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop only requires a single set of materials to order superior-grade spirit weapons." "What?" Elder Zhang slammed the table and stood up. His expression changed starkly with disbelief. "That's impossible." Elder Zhang shook his head. Even if he were to do it himself, he would need at least 10 sets of materials to guarantee that he would be able to refine a high-grade spiritual weapon. Yet, Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop only needed one set of materials? Although there was only one spiritual pattern between a middle-grade spiritual weapon and a high-grade spiritual weapon, it was this one spiritual pattern that stumped more than half of the blacksmiths. An additional spiritual pattern would greatly increase the failure rate of spirit gathering. How could a single set of materials guarantee a 100% success rate in forging a high-grade spirit artifact? Gu Yong smiled bitterly and said, "Elder Zhang, we can't go on like this. The impact on our crafting workshop is too great." "What is this person's background? Have you investigated?" Elder Zhang suddenly asked. Gu Yong said, "I've been trying to find out, but I don't have any concrete information." "Shadow, come out." Elder Zhang suddenly let out a soft shout. Squeak, squeak. From the shadows behind him, a rat half the height of a human ran out. It was pitch black all over and its eyes were cold and cunning. It growled softly and revealed its sharp teeth that were as sharp as knives. Gu Yong was shocked. This was an ancient remnant beast, the Shadow Rat. It was a Foundation Establishment spirit demon that appeared and disappeared unpredictably, specializing in sneak attacks and assassinations. "Shadow, sneak into Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop tonight. Don't expose yourself and see what sort of person this Mo Ling is." Elder Zhang's eyes shone with a cold glint as he said slowly, "If there's a chance, kill that person directly to prevent future troubles." The Shadow Mouse responded, turned around and disappeared. Within the capital, ordinary cultivators were forbidden from flying on their swords or leaping into the air. Fights were also forbidden. However, this was not absolute and there were no loopholes. As long as there was no strong spirit energy fluctuation, one could naturally hide from the eyes, ears and senses of the capital's guards. At night, as usual, Su Zimo sat quietly in his room, refining the essence energy of the dragon egg within his body. Night Spirit was sprawled beside him. In the middle of the night, Su Zimo sensed something and frowned, opening his eyes. Almost at the same time, Night Spirit suddenly moved and listened attentively. A moment later, a cold glint flashed through Night Spirit's eyes as he walked out of the room silently. Arriving at the depths of the wall, he hid in a large shadow. Su Zimo observed carefully. Although Night Spirit's eyes were open, his eyes and body had blended in perfectly with the surrounding darkness. There was no flaw in it at all. If Su Zimo had not seen Night Spirit walk in personally, he would not have believed it. Before long, a small head popped out from the top of the wall. A pair of sneaky eyes looked around and patrolled the courtyard. The shadow rat felt a vague sense of uneasiness. However, it did not notice anything unusual. After hesitating for a moment, it retreated from the top of the wall. At that moment, Night Spirit was still standing in the shadows of the night. Motionless, his gaze was cold, as though he was waiting for something. True enough. A long time later, the shadow rat appeared on the top of the wall once more. It did not leave. Instead, it was cautiously probing the situation within the wall. After discovering no danger, the shadow rat was relieved and slid down slowly from the top of the wall. The moment the shadow rat landed, Night Spirit flashed out and pounced in front of the shadow rat at a speed that was indiscernible to the naked eye. A sharp claw that shone with a cold glint reached out silently and pierced the shadow rat's flesh instantly. The shadow rat panicked and was about to open its mouth and roar. A black light flashed through the night sky. Poof! There was a crisp sound. The shadow rat's head was pierced by a spike and its eyes dimmed. That spike was Night Spirit's tail. It was still a perfect and unstoppable pounce. The shadow rat could not resist at all. The entire process from Night Spirit's attack to the end was filled with a dense killing aura that was pure and cold. Picking up the shadow rat with its mouth, Night Spirit passed through the courtyard and arrived at Jishui River. Shaking its head gently, it tossed the shadow rat's corpse into the river and disappeared with a splash. The flesh of an ancient remnant beast was not attractive to Night Spirit at all. Narrowing his eyes, Su Zimo seemed to be in deep thought as he smirked coldly. It was clear that the shadow rat was sent by someone. Finally, it can't take it anymore? True Fire Weapon Workshop. Elder Zhang and Gu Yong did not sleep for the entire night. Even at daybreak, the shadow rat did not appear. There was a hint of fatigue on Elder Zhang's face, as though he had aged 10 years overnight. Taking a deep breath of air, Elder Zhang closed his eyes and waved. Go back and rest. The shadow rat is dead. Gu Yong also realized that the fact that the shadow rat had not returned at this time meant that it was most likely dead. Elder Zhang walked out of the room and looked in the direction of Mo's spirit weapon workshop. The coldness in his eyes intensified as he muttered to himself, Mo Ling, the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Let's see how long more you can live. Chapter 260. For the past half a year, although Mo's spirit weapon workshop had risen to fame, they could only refine middle-grade spirit weapons after all. Most of them were targeted at Qi refinement warriors and foundation establishment cultivators, and their influence was limited. It was only when the news that superior-grade spirit weapons could be customized spread that Mo's spirit weapon workshop became truly famous. Most superior-grade spirit weapons were the symbol of perfected Jin Dan. Typically speaking, the first thing a foundation establishment cultivator would do after forming a core was to raise the grade of their spirit weapons. However, even the cheapest superior-grade spirit weapon required 3,000 superior-grade spirit stones. If they wanted to customize superior-grade spirit weapons, the price would be even higher and they would have to prepare 10 sets of materials. Cultivators who had just entered the Jin Dan realm typically did not have the ability to purchase them. As a result, many cultivators had to reach mid-stage or even late-stage Jin Dan realm before they could obtain a superior-grade spirit weapon of their own. However, the emergence of Mo's spirit weapon workshop gave many perfected Jin Dan cultivators, who had just formed a core, a glimmer of hope. From that day onwards, every afternoon, it was no longer Qi refinement warriors or foundation establishment cultivators who gathered outside Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Instead, it was a group of perfected Jin Dan cultivators. That was a rather spectacular sight. In the capital, apart from the Emperor of Great Zhou, there was probably no one else who had such charisma. Furthermore, even perfected Jin Dan did not dare to break the rules of Mo's spirit weapon workshop for fear of being disqualified from customizing superior grade spirit weapons. What's the background of this Mo Ling? He's so arrogant to have all of us perfected Jindan cultivators wait outside. Didn't you see that perfected being Lu has been here for 7 consecutive days? Even Jindan cultivators are waiting obediently in the later stages. Let's wait as well. True monstrous geniuses have unusual temperaments. That person must be someone who is arrogant because of his talents. Spring passed and autumn came. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo had already stayed in the capital for a year and a half. There was only a year left before the sect competition. A year and a half was almost fleeting for cultivators. However, for Su Zimo, he had been transforming every single moment for the past year and a half. It was a transformation that came from all aspects. In terms of refining, Su Zimo's skills were becoming more and more skillful, and his understanding of refining was becoming deeper and deeper. The 1,000 hammer finger technique that belonged to him was also being perfected as he continued to practice it. It was nearing completion. By the time the 1,000 tempering finger technique was perfected, Su Zimo was 100% confident that he would be able to refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon. With the supply of sufficient spirit stones, Su Zimo's cultivation base was also growing steadily, slowly approaching the peak of foundation establishment. Of course, what made Su Zimo the happiest was that he had already refined more than half of the dragon egg essence in his body. In another year's time, Su Zimo would be able to refine all of the dragon egg's essence energy. According to the current trend, his organs refining chapter would also reach the grand completion stage. At greater mastery of the organs refinement section, the moment Su Zimo stopped concealing the existence of his demonic qi and unleashed his full power of blood qi, he could wipe out almost all foundation establishment cultivators. Of course, that was not realistic unless Su Zimo wanted to become the target of public criticism. In the past year and a half, the Night Spirit had already refined and absorbed all of the dragon egg's essence energy in his body. It was much faster than Su Zimo. The Night Spirit's body had grown even larger and was half the height of a human. It was covered in black scales that were incomparably tough. The scales did not have any luster, and allowed the Night Spirit to blend into the night perfectly without being discovered. Looking at the Night Spirit's body, a thought would flash through Su Zimo's mind from time to time. This body was made for killing. Agility, strength, burst, defense, speed, and many other conditions were fused perfectly on the Night Spirit's body. Ever since the assassination attempt by the Shadow Rat, there were a few similar situations in the residence. However, before Su Zimo could make a move, the cultivators and spirit demons that came to investigate were all killed by the Night Spirit without making a single sound. Most spirit weapon workshops' business was getting better, and there were more and more perfected Jindan, who visited daily to customize superior-grade spirit weapons. Most spirit weapon workshops' influence in the capital was growing as well. From the nobles to the commoners, everyone had heard of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. Among them, True Fire Weapon Workshop was the one that was affected the most. Prior to this, True Fire Weapon Workshop was the #1 in the capital. But now Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop was showing signs of replacing it. Although on the surface, the two weapon workshops were peaceful and did not interfere in each other's business, everyone knew that this was only on the surface. Sooner or later, this peace would be broken. This morning, a series of knocks sounded from outside Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. In a flash, Nianqi arrived before the door and opened it. A plump cultivator dressed as a merchant stood outside with a nervous expression. Fellow Taoist, the customization of spirit weapons will only begin in the afternoon. You're early, Nianqi said. And no, I'm not. The merchant waved it off hurriedly and coughed gently. I'm the owner of this residence. Ah. Nianqi was stunned. Let him in. Right then, Su Zimo's voice sounded. Nianqi turned around and the merchant bowed hurriedly. After expressing his gratitude, he entered Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop carefully, as though the ground beneath his feet did not belong to him but someone else. This is the rent for the next 2 years. Take a look. Su Zimo placed a storage bag on the table and pushed it in front of the merchant. The merchant panicked and waved it off hurriedly. Don't. How can I accept your rent? Fellow Taoist, you're really making things difficult for me. Su Zimo asked with a smile, if you're not here to collect rent, is there something else? Yes. The merchant had an uneasy expression and a pleading look appeared in his eyes as he rubbed his hands. I would like to ask for your help in crafting a superior grade spirit weapon, fellow Taoist. Initially, Su Zimo wanted to reject him on the spot. However, he thought about how he might not have a place to stay in the capital if not for this person's residence. Furthermore, crafting a superior-grade spirit weapon was nothing much for him. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo nodded and agreed. Returning to the secret chamber, Su Zimo took out his weapon tripod and began to refine the weapon. The merchant requested for a flying sword. It was the most common and simplest type of spirit weapon refinement. Even so, Su Zimo did not deal with it and completed every single step seriously. When he reached the tempering step, Su Zimo's mind lit up and the questions that had been pent up in his heart for the past half a year were finally resolved. The 1,000-hammer finger technique was completely perfected. Accompanied by clinking sounds, Su Zimo's fingers were light as they tapped on the sword like sprites, removing the impurities in the sword bit by bit. By the time he was done with the tempering, Su Zimo had already realized that he might be able to craft his first supreme-grade spirit weapon. Spirit gathering began. 1 spirit pattern. 2 spirit patterns. The first 2 spirit patterns were effortless for Su Zimo. At the 3rd spirit pattern, Su Zimo encountered some obstacles. However, after a few attempts with his spirit perception, he still succeeded successfully. Su Zimo took a deep breath of air and did not stop. Instead, he chose to attempt to condense the 4th spirit pattern. Chapter 261. Time passed bit by bit. It was almost noon, but Su Zimo had yet to emerge from the secret chamber. The merchant was getting impatient from waiting at the side. Frowning, he paced around the courtyard with a terrible expression. At that moment he was already regretting it. In his opinion, the reason why Su Zimo had not emerged after such a long time must be because his weapon refinement had failed. The rent for 2 years was a total of 6,000 superior-grade spirit stones, equivalent to 2 superior-grade spirit weapons and a custom-made superior-grade spirit weapon. That was equivalent to losing 3 superior-grade spirit weapons. It's a huge loss to lose 3 superior-grade spirit weapons just to befriend a weapon refinement master. The merchant was vexed. Noon. Su Zimo finally emerged from the secret chamber. He could not conceal his fatigue, as though he had expended a lot of energy. When the merchant saw that, he was even more certain of his guess. Fellow Taoist, where's my superior-grade spirit weapon? The merchant leaned forward and asked with a fake smile. Su Zimo shook his head. I didn't refine a superior-grade spirit weapon. True enough. The merchant retracted his smile and his expression darkened. Without waiting for Su Zimo to continue, he interrupted. Fellow Taoist Mo, I didn't collect the rent for the previous 2 years. Coupled with the loss of this superior-grade spirit weapon, let's discuss the matter of compensation. Compensation? Su Zimo raised his brows slightly and gradually reacted. A mocking look flashed through his eyes as he asked, in that case, you don't want this supreme-grade spirit weapon anymore? Huh. Supreme-grade spirit weapon. The merchant was stunned and wondered if he had heard wrongly. Nianqi's beautiful eyes widened in disbelief as well. Su Zimo opened his palm and a freshly refined flying sword laid quietly in his palm, exactly as the merchant had requested. Su Zimo injected spirit energy and a bedazzling spirit light burst forth from the sword. 4 spirit patterns lit up consecutively, almost blinding the merchant's eyes. 4 spirit tattoos? The merchant was so shocked that he nearly fell to the ground with a quivering voice and dumbfounded eyes. Supreme-grade spirit weapon. After a long time, an ear-piercing scream rang out in the house, spreading to every corner. The merchant's eyes glowed with excitement. He was so excited that his cheeks were flushed. He wanted to step forward and take the supreme-grade flying sword, but he was too embarrassed to do so. One couldn't blame the merchant for losing his composure. Reverend Jin Dan has a lifespan of 500 years. Generally speaking, with the passage of time, perfected Jin Dan's cultivation realm would gradually deepen, and he would accumulate more and more. He would be able to obtain 1 or 2 superior-grade spirit weapons. However, apart from the top factions of Tianhuang mainland, most perfected Jin Dan might not even be able to obtain a single supreme-grade spirit weapon in their entire lives. Fellow Taoist Mo, young Master Mo, the merchant said with a flattering smile, you are the best blacksmith, don't lower yourself to my level. I was just talking nonsense, don't take it seriously. Although the merchant was perfected Jin Dan, the moment Su Zimo was able to refine superior grade and supreme grade spirit weapons, their statuses had already swapped. Take it, Su Zimo was in a great mood now that he had taken an important step in the art of tempering, and could not be bothered to bicker with this person. Young Master Mo, from this day forth this house is yours. Feel free to stay. The merchant received the supreme grade flying sword with a smile on his face. His house could only be sold for 100,000 superior grade spirit stones at most. However, a single supreme grade spirit weapon would cost at least 500,000 superior grade spirit stones. No matter how he looked at it, he had profited greatly from this transaction and could be said to have found a silver lining. The merchant left Mo's spirit weapon workshop gleefully. That day, a piece of news spread through the capital rapidly in an earth-shattering manner. From this day forth, Mo's spirit weapon workshop would no longer refine superior grade spirit weapons. Instead, they would be customizing supreme grade spirit weapons. What did customizing supreme grade spirit weapons mean? This meant that Mo's spirit weapon workshop had full confidence in refining supreme grade spirit weapons. Throughout history, no weapon refinement master had ever dared to make such a claim. Of course, Mo's spirit weapon workshop's customization of supreme grade spirit weapons was very different from the previous rules. Firstly, Mo's spirit weapon workshop would only customize a single supreme grade spirit weapon every month. They would not be open for business at any other time. Secondly, Mo's spirit weapon workshop would hold an auction at the beginning of every month, where the highest bidder would have the chance to customize a supreme grade spirit weapon for that month. Thirdly, cultivators would have to prepare 30 sets of materials for supreme grade spirit weapons. The moment the news spread, the capital was in an uproar. Many Jin Dan realm experts appeared one after another and walked out of seclusion, wanting to head to Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Supreme grade spirit weapons were way too tempting for perfected Jin Dan, and there was no market for them. Given Su Zimo's capabilities, he would only require a single set of materials to refine a supreme grade spirit weapon every afternoon. With that, he would be able to refine 30 supreme grade spirit weapons in a month. That was an extremely frightening number. If all of them were placed in the market, it would cause a huge uproar and even attract a lot of trouble. The price of supreme grade spirit weapons would definitely drop as well. Therefore, Su Zimo changed his method. To the outside world, he would only refine a single supreme grade spirit weapon every month. However, in reality, Su Zimo would refine a supreme grade spirit weapon every day using the 30 sets of materials required to customize a supreme grade spirit weapon, and continue to raise his weapon refinement standards. That night, two perfected Jin Dan cultivators arrived at True Fire Weapon Workshop, looking travel-worn and weathered. Both of them were old men with white beards and wrinkles all over their faces. Their eyes were cloudy and they exuded an aura of old age. Meng Han Liangqiu, please come in, fellow Taoists. Elder Zhang went forward and welcomed the two of them into the back hall hurriedly. Elder Zhang, long time no see. How have you been? Meng Han nodded and cupped his fists. Heis. Elder Zhang shook his head and let out a long sigh. Liangqiu said, don't worry, Elder Zhang. The reason why we're here is to resolve this matter for the sect. Don't worry. That's right. Both of us don't have much lifespan left. Instead of dying of old age, we might as well fight this person to death in exchange for the prosperity of True Fire Sect. A vicious glint flashed through Meng Han's cloudy eyes. For the past 1.5 years, True Fire Weapon Workshop had been enduring silently. However, when news of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop being able to customize supreme grade spirit weapons spread, Elder Zhang could no longer sit still. The influence of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop was growing. If they allowed it to continue developing, it would not only affect the business of True Fire Weapon Workshop, but also the reputation of True Fire Sect. True Fire Sect sent two perfected Jin Dan cultivators to the capital right away. They were Liangqiu and Meng Han. True Fire Sect's plan was clear: to exchange lives. In the capital of Great Zhou there were 3 capital guards, the Scarlet Vulture, Azure Falcon and White Hawk guards. The commanders of the 3 guards were all Jin Dan realm experts. The 3 guards took turns patrolling the streets day and night in a strict manner. If there was even the slightest movement, the patrolling guards would arrive at the first moment. As for Liangqiu and Meng Han, they wanted to kill Mo Ling in the weapon workshop before the capital guards arrived. This was an assassination that they knew was bound to die. A life for a life. Of course, if not for the fact that Liang Qiu and Meng Han were nearing the end of their lifespans, they would not have come for this. Chapter 262. Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop. Su Zimo assumed a lotus position in his room, and used the breathing technique of the organ's refinement section to refine the essence energy of the dragon egg in his body. Each time he inhaled, Su Zimo's mouth and nose would release a rich demonic qi that filled the room, conjuring all sorts of beasts. Some flapped their wings and soared into the skies while others roared into the skies. All of them had different forms and were extraordinary. Among the thousands of beasts, Su Zimo sat in the middle motionlessly, exuding a terrifying aura that was above all life that was shuddering. It was late at night and Nian Qi had already fallen asleep in the room beside him. Only the night spirit accompanied Su Zimo the entire time. All of a sudden, Su Zimo jolted awake from his cultivation and opened his eyes, causing two cold glints to flash through the night. He felt a strong sense of trepidation. Almost at the same time, the night spirit sensed it and stood up as well. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes. There did not seem to be anything different in the courtyard. If not for his spirit perception, Su Zimo would not have been able to sense that danger was approaching. Someone had climbed over the wall and landed in the courtyard. The fact that they could hide from Su Zimo's eyes and ears without a sound was proof of how strong they were. The Jishui River was still flowing with gushing water. Although it seemed normal, Su Zimo could vaguely catch a hint of abnormality in the sound of flowing water. There were experts approaching from both the front and back. If Su Zimo was not wrong, the intruders should be at the level of perfected Jin Dan. Liang Qiu and Meng Han did not dare to be careless and had already made plans in True Fire Weapon Workshop. In order to ensure that nothing went wrong, the two of them split up. One of them entered through the walls while the other sneaked into Jishui River and flowed downstream. Almost at the same time, two perfected Jin Dan who did not have much lifespan entered the residence and headed towards Su Zimo's room. Up till now, the two of them had yet to use spirit energy. The moment spirit energy was used, especially in a fight, the guards of the capital would definitely be alerted. The sooner the guards were alerted, the less time they had left. Suddenly, a faint sigh came from the room. "You're finally here." Upon hearing that, Liang Qiu and Meng Han's expressions changed. Then a dazzling light shone under their feet. The light of the Great Array. Outside the room, there was a formation engraved on it. The light of the grand formation was blazing like a torch, shooting straight into the clouds, adding a murderous aura to the boundless night. Tonight, it was the Azure Falcon Guard's turn to patrol. Every Azure Falcon Guard had a demonic beast, the Azure Falcon, as their companion, hence the name. Each of the Gerfalcons was a Foundation Establishment Realm Spirit Demon. They were all extraordinary and powerful. When they flapped their wings and unleashed their full power, they were extremely fast. All the Blue Falcons patrolling the streets of Royal City saw the formation light beam. Looking at the light of this formation, it should be a Grade 2 formation. Yes, but look at the heterogeneous light. It might be two or more types of formations fused together. The Azure Falcon Guards discussed as they sped towards the origin of the formation light. Which direction is this? By the looks of it, it seems to be Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. Not good, Mr. Emo is in trouble. The expressions of many Azure Falcon Guards changed starkly as they sped with all their might. One of them even withdrew a green badge from his storage bag and tossed it into the air. When the badge was tossed to the highest point, it exploded silently and a gigantic Gerfalcon appeared. The Azure Falcon Badge. The Azure Falcon Badge would only be used when something extremely important happened. For the past 2 years, the person with the greatest influence and reputation in the capital was the owner of Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop, Weapon Refinement Master Mo Ling. Now, everyone had to respectfully address him as Mr. Mo, even when they were discussing after a meal. The fact that he could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons alone was enough to make Mo Ling the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty. In the capital, be it early-stage Jin Dan perfected beings or late-stage Jin Dan perfected beings, it was an honor to be able to meet Mr. Mo. Almost at the same time, a green figure soared into the air and sped towards Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop at lightning speed. The moment the formation light lit up, Liang Qiu and Meng Han's hearts sank. It was only a grade 2 formation and could not trap the two of them. However, the two of them had already alerted the capital guards before they could even meet the legendary Mo Ling. It was equivalent to them losing the initiative, and the situation took a turn for the worse. They were completely passive. 10 breaths. If the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards, Mu Dongqing, were to rush here at full speed, he would only need 10 breaths. This meant that Liang Qiu and Meng Han had to find Mo Ling within 10 breaths and kill him on the spot. Otherwise, they would be the ones to die when the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards arrived after 10 breaths. 10 breaths. That's enough. Liang Qiu hollered and conjured hand seals with his left hand, conjuring a spirit art. His right sleeve trembled and a flying sword shot out. Almost instantly 3 spirit patterns lit up on the sword. It was a superior grade spirit weapon. Boom! Accompanied by a loud bang. The barrier of the grade 2 formation shattered on the spot and dissipated into the world, revealing a green-robed cultivator behind it. He had delicate features and a calm expression as he glared over coldly. At the same time, Meng Han slapped his storage bag and waved both hands, shooting out 2 cold beams of light. The spirit patterns lit up and shone brightly. 2 superior-grade flying swords. Die! Meng Han's 2 flying swords shot towards the green-robed cultivator like 2 streaks of light. Before the swords arrived, the cold air was oppressive and the surrounding temperature plummeted. At that moment, a breath had passed. Everyone knew. There were only 2 people and 1 beast in Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Since the green-robed cultivator before them was not the girl named Nian Qi, his identity was obvious. In reality, Liang Qiu and Meng Han were stunned the moment they caught sight of Su Zimo. They had not expected that the number 1 weapon refinement master of Great Zhou, Mr. Mo, would be a young man in his 20s. Furthermore, the young man was only at Foundation Establishment realm. However, before long, Liang Qiu and Meng Han snapped back to their senses and a look of mockery flashed through their eyes. To them, Su Zimo was already a dead man. Against the combined forces of 2 Jindan perfected beings, even if Su Zimo was a meridian cultivator, he would not be able to last more than 10 breaths, let alone the fact that he was only at late-stage Foundation establishment. Meng Han's 2 flying swords pierced towards Su Zimo at an extremely fast speed. Su Zimo did not dodge at all, as though he was scared out of his wits, or perhaps he could not react in time. It's over. Liang Qiu and Meng Han glared at Su Zimo coldly, as though they could see the latter's head being pierced by the flying swords and blood gushing out. Snap! The next moment, a cracking sound echoed from the battlefield, causing their expressions to change starkly. He wasn't dead. The flying swords did not hit Su Zimo. Instead, they pierced through another barrier. There were other formations apart from the grade 2 formation. This was a chain of great arrays. At that moment, 2 breaths had passed. Chapter 263. In Liang Qiu and Meng Han's vision, Su Zimo was not far away and seemed to be within reach. However, in reality, there were dozens of grade 2 formations between them. A year ago, on the night Night Spirit killed the Shadow Rat, Su Zimo had already realized that someone in the capital wanted his life. In fact, one day in the future, perfected Jindan might even come to assassinate him. The difference between the Foundation Establishment realm and Jindan realm was too great. Even though Su Zimo was both an immortal and demonic cultivator and released his full power of blood qi, he could not take on perfected Jindan head-on. If perfected Jindan were to arrive, he would almost certainly die. However, this was the capital of Great Zhou after all. What Su Zimo wanted to do was not to take on perfected Jindan head-on, but to stall for time. As long as he could hold out for a short period of time and wait for the guards of the capital to arrive, perfected Jindan's assassination attempt would be for naught. For this day, Su Zimo set up many grade 2 formations outside that were interconnected. Even if perfected Jindan was trapped, it would be difficult for him to break out of the formations within a short period of time. There were dozens of formations that were a combination of illusion, trap and killing formations. Although they were also grade 2 formations, they were almost at the peak of grade 2 formations. Bang! 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 Liang Qiu and Meng Han released spirit arts continuously and lights shone through the night skies as the sounds of formations shattering echoed. In the blink of an eye, another 2 breaths passed. 4 breaths had passed since the 2 of them were exposed. However, the 2 of them were still trapped in the formation and did not rush out. Sensing the urgency of time, Meng Han's expression changed slightly as he said coldly, "Just how many formations did that person set up?" In 2 breaths, the two of them had destroyed at least 10 formations, but they still did not rush out of this place. If this continued, the two of them would probably die in the formation before they could even see Su Zimo. Liang Qiu withdrew a talisman from his storage bag and injected spirit energy with a vicious glint in his eyes. Whoosh! The talisman floated in midair and shone with 3 incomparably dazzling spirit patterns, emitting an incomparably tyrannical energy fluctuation that was getting increasingly intense. 3rd-tier talisman. Su Zimo's heart trembled. The aura released by that grade 3 talisman was even more terrifying than the combined attacks of Liang Qiu and Meng Han. If Su Zimo were to be struck by the explosive power of this talisman, his body would be instantly pierced through. The talisman shattered. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening boom, the ground in Mo's spirit weapon workshop shook violently. The blue stone shattered, the soil was overturned, and the house shook as if it could collapse at any moment. Countless dust rustled down. A ball of blazing and dazzling brilliance burst out from the center of the shattered talisman, like the arrival of a scorching sun, and a force that was almost destructive swept out in all directions. Initially, there were more than 30 grade 2 formations around Liang Qiu and Meng Han. Even though they did not know anything about formations, the two of them could break through the formations with brute force. 10 breaths was more than enough for them to break through the formations. However, even if they could break through the formations, their mission for this trip would be considered a failure. Time was of the essence. Therefore, Liang Qiu had no choice but to release that grade 3 talisman. That was his strongest offensive method that he had exchanged for with almost all his assets. It was also his final trump card. After the talisman shattered, the terrifying power destroyed more than 30 grade 2 formations instantly. There were only 5 breaths left. The moment the formations shattered, Night Spirit moved. A black shadow flashed by. Under the cover of the night, it was difficult to discern with the naked eye and arrived before Liang Qiu almost instantly. 10 sharp claws silently extended from the gaps between the fingers. They were sharp, long, and curved slightly, like 10 gigantic hooks that shone with a cold glint. There was almost no way to break free from those claws. Night Spirit's front claws gripped Liang Qiu's shoulders instantly while its back claws stomped on Liang Qiu's ribs. At the same time, it opened its beastly mouth and bit towards Liang Qiu's neck. It was a simple action, but Liang Qiu's entire body was restrained. His shoulders were locked and his arms were crippled. With its back claws piercing into his ribs, not only could it pierce his organs instantly, it could also change its move at any time to defend against Liang Qiu's legs. That was not the end. Night Spirit's spear-like tailbone shone with a dark, cold glint and had already pierced towards Liang Qiu's dantian silently. The strongest method of every perfected Jin Dan was to self-destruct their Jin Dan. The self-detonation of the golden core would instantly unleash an extremely terrifying force that could even kill cultivators of the same level. Of course, once a perfected Jin Dan chose to self-destruct, the self-destructing perfected Jin Dan would definitely die without a corpse. Therefore, no perfected Jin Dan would choose to self-destruct until the last moment. In fact, the vast majority of perfected Jin Dan would not choose to self-destruct until the moment of their death. Not everyone had the courage to self-destruct. However, once Night Spirit's tail pierced Liang Qiu's dantian, it meant that Liang Qiu would not even have the chance to self-destruct. There was no way for him to retreat. Night Spirit's attack could be said to be perfect and there were almost no flaws. Every single detail was executed to the limits of its ability to kill. In order to possess such brilliant combat techniques, one would often have to go through countless life and death battles and escape from the jaws of death before they could be honed. However, Night Spirit was a complete exception. No one taught it those things. However, those things seemed to have been fused into its bones and were deeply rooted. It was as if they were innate talents that were passed down in its bloodline. The moment Night Spirit lunged forward, Liang Qiu was shocked and a hint of panic flashed through his eyes. However, he was a perfected Jin Dan after all. Furthermore, he was a perfected Jin Dan who had lived for close to 500 years. In his lifetime, he had seen and experienced way too many battles and killings. Liang Qiu's speed could not compare to Night Spirit's. If he chose to dodge instinctively at this moment, he would definitely die. Liang Qiu suppressed the panic in his heart and had a calm expression. He tapped his storage bag and a protection talisman appeared in his palm, which he crushed immediately. Whoosh! A barrier appeared on the surface of Liang Qiu's body and shone with a blazing light, bursting forth with a shocking power. All of Night Spirit's killing moves were blocked by the protection talisman. Night Spirit's body was repelled by the power of the protection talisman as well. Liang Qiu was so scared that he broke out in cold sweat. Crack! 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 The light barrier shattered and dimmed. Although Liang Qiu was unscathed, Night Spirit's single lunge destroyed a Grade 3 protection talisman. As for Liang Qiu, he relied on the Grade 3 talisman to prolong his life and gain a breather. Beast, how dare you! Liang Qiu was enraged. Jin Dan channeled and an incomparably pure spirit energy burst forth. Conjuring hand seals with his left hand, he waved his right hand and a frosty sword chi pierced towards Night Spirit's head instantly. The moment Night Spirit missed its attack, he already realized that something was amiss. Shoo! A cold light flashed. Both parties were too close. Coupled with the fact that Liang Qiu attacked with all his might in a rage, the flying sword arrived almost instantly. Night Spirit tilted his head with all his might and avoided a fatal blow. A flash of blood appeared. A bone-deep wound appeared on Night Spirit's cheek and blood flowed profusely. In reality, given Liang Qiu's strength as a Jin Dan, even if Night Spirit avoided a fatal blow, the sword chi on the sword was enough to slice Night Spirit's head into two. However, it was the pitch-black scales on Night Spirit's cheeks that blocked most of the damage from the sword chi and saved its life. Although it was merely a single exchange, it was already perilous. If the man and beast did not deal with it properly, both of them would die on the spot. Chapter 264. No matter what, the difference in strength between the two of them was clear. Night Spirit was still in his infancy stage and could only be considered as a foundation establishment spirit demon. Although Liang Dan was an old man past his prime, he was a Jin Dan perfected being. Furthermore, his flying sword was only the first strike. The moment he attacked, Liang Dan conjured a spirit art with his left hand and conjured a gigantic fire spear that emitted an incomparably scorching temperature. The surrounding air was already burning with crackling sounds. Bastard, die! Liang Dan growled and revealed a menacing smile. Both of them were extremely close. Coupled with the fact that Night Spirit had just dodged Liang Dan's flying sword and was still in midair, there was no way for him to dodge at all. If he was struck by perfected Jin Dan's spirit art, Night Spirit would be severely injured even with the protection of his black scales. That was how melee combat was. It was extremely dangerous and only a single moment mattered. The situation took a turn for the worse. Night Spirit missed his attack and lost the initiative. He was instantly in grave danger. On the other side, Meng Han had attacked Su Zimo as well. Shoo! Shoo! The sound of sharp blades tearing through the air was extremely ear-piercing and carried with them a suffocating chill. Two sword beams streaked through the night sky and arrived before Su Zimo almost instantly. Meng Han did not underestimate Su Zimo just because he was a foundation establishment cultivator. A lion would use all its strength even when hunting a rabbit. One after another, the two flying swords trapped Su Zimo in the middle, cutting off his escape route completely. After the formation was destroyed, Su Zimo and Night Spirit were completely exposed to the two perfected Jin Dan perfected beings and had no chance of escaping. If they wanted to live, they could only rely on their true capabilities. When Meng Han attacked, Su Zimo did not even look. That was because he knew that perfected Jin Dan was too fast and it would be too late for him to dodge by the time he saw the incoming flying sword. Su Zimo relied on his spirit perception. The cicada senses the autumn wind before it moves. Meng Han's two flying swords had just left his hand when Su Zimo instantly lowered his body and laid on the ground. Using his limbs, he was like a nimble python as he charged forward at an extremely fast speed. When the flying sword missed, Meng Han frowned. He obviously didn't expect Su Zimo to have such a move. Su Zimo walked close to the ground. His expression was calm, and his eyes emitted a deep light. When his gaze fell on another person, it was as if he had seen his prey. At almost the same time, on the other side of the battlefield, Night Spirit did not panic at all when he saw the thick and huge fire spear about to shoot out from Liang Dan's fingertips. His eyes were pitch black and his gaze was cold. Between the man and the beast, a strange fluctuation suddenly appeared in the void. Whoosh! It was as if something had pierced through the night sky and stabbed back at him in an instant. It was Night Spirit's tail. Puff! The sound of a sharp weapon piercing flesh could be heard. Instantly, the sharp spike on Night Spirit's tail pierced through Liang Dan's extended arm. Ah! Liang Dan could not help but cry out in pain when he was severely injured. His arm trembled and the spirit energy gathered on his fingertips almost dissipated. Although the fire spear was shot out, its strength was much weaker. Bang! Just as Liang Dan had expected, Night Spirit did not have the strength to dodge the incoming fire spear and was struck right in the chest. However, due to the decrease in strength of the fire spear, Night Spirit merely rolled on the ground before crawling back up. His gaze was ferocious and he reeked of blood. Liang Dan truly did not expect the situation to change in the instant they exchanged blows. Night Spirit's final struggle had not only resolved his crisis, he had even been injured. That was his combat talent. Night Spirit made use of its immense combat talent to forcefully reverse the situation from an absolute disadvantage. Furthermore, it even managed to gain a slight advantage against the golden cores. Before Liang Dan could catch his breath, another suffocating killing intent surged over. Suddenly, a black shadow rose from the ground and arrived before him. Hand over your life. Su Zimo hollered and swung his arm, drawing a gigantic arc in midair. Using his fist as a seal, he descended from the skies and instantly caused the air to explode with a deafening sound. Time seemed to have stopped. Instantly, Liang Dan's pupils constricted and his heart stopped beating. In just a few short breaths, Liang Dan had truly been shocked way too much. Night Spirit was only one of them. It was even more so for this green-robed cultivator named Mo Ling. Liang Dan truly had not expected that a mere Foundation establishment cultivator would choose not to escape against the assassination of two perfected Jean Dan. Instead, he would take the initiative to attack perfected Jean Dan, who gave him the guts. Furthermore, Su Zimo's timing this time round could be said to be perfect. Liang Dan's protection talisman was already shattered. His left arm was injured and he had yet to recall his flying sword. He had just released a spirit art, and his spirit energy was unable to sustain it. This was his weakest moment. Against Su Zimo's fist, Liang Dan had no means of defending and could only raise his right arm instinctively to block while retreating at the same time. Bang! Liang Dan's arm collided with Su Zimo's fist and let out a sound of leather being defeated. Snap! Immediately after, the bone-chilling sound of bones cracking could be heard. In Liang Dan's line of sight, his forearm was completely broken and bent into an extremely strange state. Liang Dan opened his mouth and was about to scream when an even more tragic aura of death surged over, drowning his voice. The seal broke his arm, but it didn't stop there. Its power didn't seem to have weakened much, and it continued to smash toward his head. If it hit, Liang Dan's head would explode instantly. Shoo! At the same time, one of Meng Han's flying swords was entangled with Night Spirit, while the other flew over and pierced towards the back of Su Zimo's head. If Su Zimo dodged, given Liang Dan's cultivation, he would definitely be able to seize the opportunity to escape danger. However, if Su Zimo did not care, even if he could kill Liang Dan with his palm, his head would be pierced by the flying sword and he would die on the spot. In a flash, Su Zimo did not have time to think and his gaze flickered. Without a change in expression, he retracted his right hand that had turned into a gigantic seal. Liang Hao heaved a long sigh of relief and was drenched in sweat. He retreated as though he had just walked through the gates of hell. However, Su Zimo did not even turn back as he spread his right hand behind his head, as though he wanted to use his palm to defend against the sharpness of the flying sword. When they saw that, Meng Han and Liang Dan were stunned. No matter how strong Mo Ling's physique was, there was no way he could defend against the superior-grade flying sword of perfected being Jean Dan. What was the meaning of his actions? Was Mo Ling dumb? Clang! Instantly, the flying sword pierced Su Zimo's right palm and fresh blood flowed out. However, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. The flying sword did not manage to pierce Su Zimo's right palm. Meng Han's expression changed starkly. How was that possible? Even though he managed to defend against the sword, the tremendous force from the flying sword still caused Su Zimo to grunt as the flesh on his arm exploded into a blood mist. Making use of that force, Su Zimo took a step forward and arrived before Liang Dan instantly. Liang Dan had just calmed down when his heart skipped a beat before he could even catch his breath. Not good. When he met Su Zimo's gaze, Liang Dan's expression changed. How was that the gaze of a human? That gaze was clearly as though he wanted to devour someone. Su Zimo extended his left arm and his tendons and bones rang together. His arm expanded and coiled around Liang Dan's head like a long snake. Liang Dan's head spun around his neck and was almost twisted off. By the time it was fixed, it was already unrecognizable. Liang Dan was dead. Jin Dan was dead. Chapter 265. From the moment Night Spirit attacked to the two exchanges with Liang Dan, to the moment Su Zimo closed in and released killing moves consecutively to kill Liang Dan, the entire process seemed slow on the surface, but in reality it only took 2 breaths of time. Suddenly the courtyard fell silent. Meng Han's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at Liang Dan, who was on the ground. Perfected Jin Dan had died in the hands of a Foundation Establishment cultivator. Everything happened too quickly. It was so quick that Meng Han could not accept it. What Meng Han could not understand was why his flying sword did not pierce Su Zimo's palm. His flying sword had clearly pierced Su Zimo's flesh. Why was it suddenly stuck and the sound of metal clashing could be heard? If not for that, Liang Dan would not have died. That was the truth as well. Although Su Zimo was both an immortal and demonic cultivator and Night Spirit had sharp claws, in terms of true strength, he was still unable to take on Perfected Jin Dan head-on. In a different environment and situation, be it Su Zimo or Night Spirit, they could only flee in a one-on-one fight. However, there were way too many factors that could affect the outcome of a fight between cultivators. Night Spirit played a huge role in killing Perfected Jin Dan. If it had not destroyed Liang Dan's protection talisman and attracted most of his attention, Su Zimo would not have had the chance to get close. Of course, Liang Dan's greatest mistake was to underestimate Su Zimo's courage and determination. He was not the only one. Meng Han had not expected that Su Zimo would dare to take the initiative to attack against the assassination of 2 Perfected Jin Dan. In just 2 breaths of time, the situation had undergone an earth-shattering change. Liang Dan was dead. Meng Han was the only one left. Most importantly, he only had 3 breaths of time left. Unknowingly, a young girl around 17 or 18 years old walked out from another room. She wore an elegant long dress and was extremely beautiful with her yellow curly hair that was let down. A flying sword hovered in front of Nian Qi and buzzed with a bright spirit light. There were actually 4 spirit patterns flickering on it. A supreme-grade flying sword. Meng Han took a look and his mouth twitched. His eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets. As a Taoist master Jin Dan, he had lived for over 400 years and was about to die, but he had never used a supreme-grade flying sword in his entire life. This girl was only in the early stage of Foundation establishment, and she was just a little maid. How could she have a supreme-grade flying sword? Suddenly, Meng Han recalled some rumors in the capital recently. Many cultivators said that the green-robed cultivator before him was the #1 weapon refinement master of the Great Zhou dynasty, and could even customize supreme-grade spirit weapons. Before this, Meng Han refused to believe it and scoffed at the rumors. He had lived for so long, but he had never heard of any weapon refiner who dared to say that they could customize supreme-grade spirit weapons. Now Meng Han believed it when he saw the supreme-grade flying sword floating in front of Nian Qi. Even a little maidservant had a supreme-grade flying sword. How many supreme-grade spiritual artifacts did Mo Ling possess? In the courtyard, Su Zimo, Night Spirit and Nian Qi stood in 3 different directions, facing off against Meng Han. Under normal circumstances, an early-stage Foundation establishment girl would pose no threat to Meng Han. However, the problem was that the girl was wielding a supreme-grade flying sword. Although the strength of an early-stage Foundation establishment was insufficient, the lethality of a supreme-grade flying sword was way too strong. The 2 people and beast had different methods and there was nothing to be afraid of if any one of them stood out. However, the 2 people and beast each had their own trump cards and none of them could be underestimated. Nian Qi's supreme-grade flying sword. Night Spirit's lackey had a strong physique. However, Su Zimo's methods were the most unfathomable to Meng Han. He had the body and speed of a demon beast, a terrifying burst of strength, proficient in melee combat techniques, and an extremely sharp sense of danger. Against this foundation establishment cultivator, Meng Han felt a hint of fear in the depths of his heart. Ah! Meng Han cast aside his distracting thoughts and roared, attacking ferociously. He could not wait any longer. This was his final gamble and the only chance to kill Su Zimo. Shoo! Shoo! Meng Han's sleeves fluttered and 2 flying swords shot out. At the same time he conjured hand seals with his left hand, conjuring a gigantic blazing disc that enveloped Night Spirit. Meng Han's first attack was 1 against 3, and he was targeting them. He had witnessed the speed of Night Spirit's movement technique, and knew that it would be difficult to stop Night Spirit with a flying sword unless the sword-wielding technique was intricate enough. Therefore, Meng Han chose to use a spirit art that had a larger attack range. The purpose of that spirit art was to slow down Night Spirit slightly. As for the other 2 flying swords, they were extremely fast. One of them headed straight for Nian Qi while the other pierced towards Su Zimo. Su Zimo's gaze flickered. The moment Meng Han attacked, he moved and stuck close to the ground, arriving before Meng Han in the blink of an eye. Su Zimo soared into the air and took a deep breath of air. His chest puffed up as he knelt on one knee and raised his hands. It was as though he was holding an immortal peach in his palms as killing intent gushed out from his eyes. You've been tricked. Meng Han's eyes lit up and he laughed sinisterly. The Jin Dan within his body circulated wildly as he conjured hand seals with both hands, conjuring 2 long spears that pierced towards Su Zimo viciously. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was a full-powered attack from perfected Jin Dan, and there was no way Su Zimo could defend against it head-on. The moment Su Zimo died, Meng Han realized that even if he were to attack with all his might against Su Zimo, it would be difficult for him to kill the latter within 3 breaths as long as the latter chose to escape instead of fighting. Therefore, Meng Han attacked first to restrain Night Spirit before attacking Su Zimo and Nian Qi at the same time. That attack did not pose much of a threat to Su Zimo. However, it was enough to claim Nian Qi's life. Not everyone possessed Su Zimo's spirit perception, and could avoid perfected Jin Dan's flying sword at Foundation Establishment realm. Therefore, if Su Zimo wanted to save Nian Qi, he had to attack with all his might. That scene was exactly the same as how Su Zimo killed Liang Dan just now. The only difference was that Liang Dan was not prepared. However, Meng Han had already prepared a backup plan. Before the flying sword could reach Nian Qi, it had already lost Meng Han's control and fell. That attack was a feint with the goal of luring Su Zimo forward. Right from the beginning, Meng Han's entire focus was on Su Zimo. Su Zimo was half kneeling on the ground while Meng Han stood upright and looked down from above. The 2 of them were extremely close and were almost face to face. Su Zimo's outcome seemed to be destined. Suddenly, Meng Han saw a hint of mockery in Su Zimo's eyes. Kill! The next moment, Su Zimo suddenly opened his mouth and let out a deafening roar from the depths of his throat. A massive air current surged over like a sharp arrow. Meng Han was caught off guard and shuddered. He was momentarily distracted and his hand paused momentarily. However, he still plunged down. The moment Meng Han was distracted, Su Zimo exerted strength in his legs and fell to the ground, dodging backwards. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water without any sluggishness at all. The moment Su Zimo closed in, he retreated at an even faster speed without stopping. Meng Han's initial attack was a feint. As for Su Zimo's sanguine ape fruit offering, it was also a feint. The one who was fooled was not Su Zimo, but Meng Han. Su Zimo expected that Meng Han would definitely kill him. However, he could not leave Nian Qi in the lurch. That was the reason why he advanced and retreated. This was a psychological game of life and death. In the end, Su Zimo won. Chapter 266. Boom! There was a deafening sound. The 2 spears in Meng Han's hands were stabbed into the ground heavily. Instantly, the stone slabs exploded and sand flew everywhere while mud was overturned. He missed. Meng Han looked at the huge pit that he had just created in front of him and was slightly dazed. Meng Han maintained his original posture of bending over and gripping the air with both hands motionlessly as though he was holding onto 2 spears. He had lost. Meng Han's gaze dimmed gradually. There were only 2 breaths of time left and Meng Han still had the strength to launch his final attack. However, he felt a deep sense of helplessness in his heart. That was because he knew that there was no way he could kill Su Zimo within 2 breaths of time. Unless Meng Han lowered his head and a glint flashed through the depths of his eyes before disappearing swiftly. In the eyes of Su Zimo, Nian Qi and Night Spirit, Meng Han was like an old man who had lost his soul, frozen on the spot and helpless. This was a rare opportunity. Night Spirit's gaze was dark. Just as he was about to pounce forward and bite Meng Han to death, he was stopped by Su Zimo's gaze. Night Spirit understood the stern warning in Su Zimo's eyes and did not act rashly. Not far away, the sound of robes fluttering could be heard clearly. The intruder had a powerful aura and was rushing over at lightning speed. The guards of the capital were about to arrive. Furthermore, that person's cultivation should be perfected Jin Dan as well. Meng Han hunched his back and raised his head. His eyes were turbid and dull, as though he had aged significantly in an instant, and the aura he exuded was even stronger. You've won. Meng Han looked at Su Zimo quietly with a helpless tone and a self-mocking smile. Su Zimo turned slightly and glanced at Meng Han from the corner of his eyes. He did not say anything, but there was a faint smile on his lips. My fate is already set. Emoling, kill me. Meng Han sighed deeply and closed his eyes, as if he had completely given up on resisting. Su Zimo suddenly laughed and asked, do you really want me to rush up now so that you can self-destruct Jin Dan? Hearing this, Meng Han suddenly opened his eyes. His face was ferocious, and he finally revealed his fangs and claws. Self-destructing Jin Dan was his final trump card. Meng Han knew that with Su Zimo's alertness and agility, even if he used all his strength, he wouldn't be able to get close to Su Zimo in 2 breaths. That was why Meng Han decided to take the risk and make a final gamble. He wanted to lure Su Zimo into his trap by pretending to be completely disheartened. Unfortunately, Su Zimo saw through it at a glance. A crushing defeat. Right from the beginning, he and Liang Dan had never had the upper hand and were led by the nose by Mo Ling, a weapon refinement master and a mere foundation establishment cultivator. Meng Han grit his teeth hatefully and flew into a rage out of humiliation. With a deep growl, he charged towards Su Zimo. At the same time, the Jin Dan in Meng Han's dantian spun rapidly and expanded continuously. Before long, it reached a critical point and emitted a frightening aura. Self-destructing Jin Dan was a difficult choice for most perfected Jin Dan cultivators. However, Meng Han did not hesitate at all. That was because his fate was already set. His lifespan was almost up, and even if he wasn't killed by the guards of the capital, he wouldn't be able to live for more than 3 years. The moment Meng Han made his move, Su Zimo had already retreated into the distance. Sprinting the entire time, he maintained a sufficient distance from Meng Han. Audacious thief, how dare you! Right at this moment, a middle-aged man in green armor stepped through the air and roared loudly, brother, you're the one who's going to die. The person wielded a gigantic hammer in each hand. He had a black face and a curly beard. His voice was rough and deafening. Get lost. The bearded man blocked Meng Han's path and glared with widened eyes. Exhaling, he threw the hammers in his hands over. Swoosh! The hammer arrived in an instant and smashed into Meng Han's chest. Snap! Meng Han's chest caved in deeply as his face turned pale. Like a kite with a broken string, he was sent flying instantly. Meng Han's body was still in midair when the energy within his body froze and was released. Boom! The golden elixir exploded, unleashing a destructive force that swept out in all directions. The Jin Dan was the essence of a cultivator's lifetime of cultivation. By self-destructing the Jin Dan, it was equivalent to releasing all of one's lifetime of cultivation back into the world. How terrifying was that? Although Su Zimo, who was standing far away, was already out of danger, he could still sense the terrifying aura released the moment the Jin Dan self-destructed. Against that power, Meng Han was the first to be destroyed. Instantly, Meng Han's body turned into a blood mist without a corpse left. Immediately after, the gigantic hammer was sent flying back the way it came, at an even faster speed with an even stronger force. The bearded man's eyes lit up. Taking a deep breath of air, he swung his other hammer and smashed it against the incoming hammer. Clang! The 2 hammers collided. There was an ear-piercing sound. The bearded man's bloodline rumbled and the muscles on his arms bulged like little snakes stuck to his skin. He managed to withstand the incoming hammer with brute force and did not retreat at all. Su Zimo nodded to himself. This meant that the bearded man was far stronger than Meng Han. Furthermore, it was clear from the bearded man's methods that he was a perfected Jin Dan who was proficient in body tempering techniques as well. The bearded man scooped up the hammers with his right hand and kept them in his storage bag. The curly bearded man surveyed his surroundings and frowned when he saw the messy courtyard. Su Zimo walked over and cupped his fists. "Thank you for arriving in time to save me, sir. It's my duty." "It's nothing." The bearded man waved it off casually before cupping his fists casually. "I'm the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards, Mu Dongqing." "Greetings, Mr. Imo." The bearded man did not bother about trifles and revealed his true nature. Su Zimo had a good impression of him. The bearded man's gaze shifted to Liang Dan's corpse. Liang Dan was already beaten beyond recognition by Su Zimo, and his original appearance could not be recognized. The bearded man squatted down and searched Liang Dan's body. After finding nothing, he took down the latter's storage bag and took a look before shaking his head. The bearded man said, "Just now, that person has already self-destructed and there's nothing left of his corpse. There's nothing on him and the storage bag is filled with useless items that can't prove his identity." Su Zimo smiled without saying anything. Two perfected Jin Dan who were nearing the end of their lifespans were mobilized for this assassination. It was clear that this was the result of meticulous planning. Since the other party chose to carry out the assassination in the capital of Great Zhou, they must have made preparations beforehand. Even if they failed, their identities would not be exposed. However, there was only one place in the entire capital that was hostile, or even murderous towards Su Zimo, and had the ability to mobilize two perfected Jin Dan to take action. True Fire Weapon Workshop. Chapter 267. Mr. Imo, the two of them are already dead and did not leave behind any evidence. I'm afraid tonight's incident. The bearded man did not continue, but the meaning behind his words was clear. In reality, it was not difficult to deduce the faction behind Meng Han and Liang Dan if one thought about it for a moment. However, without evidence, this matter would most likely be left unsettled. "It's fine." Su Zimo smiled indifferently and did not take it to heart. After losing two perfected Jin Dan for nothing tonight, the one who suffered was True Fire Weapon Workshop, not Su Zimo. The bearded man was about to turn and leave when he caught sight of the flying sword in Nianqi's hands and his eyelids twitched. Supreme Grade Flying Sword. That maidservant was wielding a Supreme Grade Flying Sword. Prior to this, the bearded man did not believe it when he heard that Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop could customize Supreme Grade spirit weapons. Even though he addressed the other party as Mr. Mo, he did not think much of it. Customizing Supreme Grade spirit weapons sounded way too far-fetched. However, when he caught sight of Su Zimo in person, the bearded man was even more convinced of his guess. Su Zimo was way too young and his cultivation realm was not high enough. He was only at Foundation Establishment realm. Typically speaking, the truly top weapon refinement masters were all perfected Jin Dan. Without enough years of weapon refinement, it was difficult for them to form their own unique perception of spirit gathering, and naturally, they would not be able to become top weapon refinement masters. Even if Mo Ling started refining weapons in his mother's womb, he would only have a few decades at most. How could he compare to perfected Jin Dan who had hundreds of years of experience in weapon refinement? In the bearded man's opinion, Su Zimo must be truly capable for him to be able to make such a name for himself in the capital. However, if he said that he could customize Supreme Grade spirit weapons, it would definitely be nonsense and was just a gimmick for his own weapon workshop. But now, when the bearded man caught sight of the Supreme Grade flying sword in Nianqi's hands, his heart began to waver. Could this Mo Ling truly be able to refine Supreme Grade spirit weapons? But he's too young. He looks to be in his early 20s. How is that possible? But his maidservant already has a top-grade spirit weapon. What kind of treatment is this for an early-stage Foundation Establishment cultivator to use a top-grade spirit weapon? He's completely insane. The curly-bearded man stood still on the spot and stared at Nianqi, who was not far away with a hint of resentment in his eyes. For such a boorish man to reveal such a gaze, the little girl was scared to death. "Sir, are you all right?" Nianqi asked in a low voice. "Ah." The bearded man froze for a moment and realized that he had lost his composure. Chuckling, he coughed gently and asked, "Mr. Mo, I heard that you can customize supreme-grade spirit weapons? Yes. Su Zimo nodded. The bearded man didn't expect Su Zimo to agree so readily. Could it be that this person could really customize supreme-grade spirit weapons? Well, what do I need to prepare if I want to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon? The bearded man asked in a low voice. Sir, I can't do it this month. Right then Nianqi spoke from the side. Nianqi was the best at this aspect. For the past 2 years she had been the one handling all the business for Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Nianqi said, Sir, you only refine a single supreme-grade spirit weapon every month. This opportunity was already auctioned off on the first day of the month. If you want to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon, sir, you can only wait until the beginning of the next month. Bring 30 sets of materials and sufficient spirit stones to bid. Don't worry, sir. Mo's spirit weapon workshop is the fairest. We don't cheat anyone and the highest bidder wins. The bearded man's mouth twitched as he rubbed his hands with a troubled expression, wanting to say something but hesitating. If he were to bid fairly with the other perfected Jindan beings, how would he have a chance, notwithstanding the fact that he didn't have enough spirit stones? He didn't even have 30 sets of materials required for weapon refinement and wasn't even qualified to bid. Su Zimo watched from the side for a while and suddenly said, Sir, I can help you refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon as repayment for saving my life today. For real? The bearded man was at a loss as to how to ask for help. When he heard Su Zimo's words, he cupped his fists hurriedly and said, Thank you, sir. Actually, as the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards, it was his duty to rush over and kill Meng Han. Su Zimo's action was partly because he had a good impression of the bearded man, and partly because he was doing the other party a favor. There were 3 major guards in the capital of Great Zhou, and the Azure Falcon Guards were one of them. Although the bearded man looked carefree, as the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards, he was someone with great authority in the capital and could do anything he wanted. It would not be a bad thing to be able to befriend him. The bearded man said, Mr. Mo, I don't have enough materials with me. I only have 7 sets. I'll have to wait for some time and come look for you when I've gathered enough. Su Zimo replied indifferently, That's enough? What? The bearded man did not understand and asked instinctively with a lost expression. Su Zimo smiled. Give me 7 sets of materials. That's enough. What kind of spirit weapon do you want to refine? Let me know if you have any requests. The bearded man went silent with a myriad of thoughts running through his mind. 7 sets of materials was enough? Just now, didn't he say that he had to prepare 30 sets? 7 sets of materials might not even be enough for other weapon refinement masters to refine a superior grade spirit weapon. Yet, this person could refine a supreme grade spirit weapon? The fact that Su Zimo said it so casually made the bearded man suspicious instead. After hesitating for a moment, the bearded man took a deep breath and chose to believe in Su Zimo. He took out 7 storage bags from his storage bag with 7 sets of materials and handed them to Su Zimo. Su Zimo smiled and nodded. The bearded man recounted his request and asked again, May I ask when I can collect this supreme-grade spirit weapon, Mr. Mo? Morning. Su Zimo replied and took over the 7 storage bags before turning to head for the secret chamber. Morning. What morning was it? The bearded man was stunned for a moment before asking hurriedly, I'll start refining the weapon right now, and it'll be ready in the morning. With that said, Su Zimo had already entered the secret chamber for weapon refinement and vanished, leaving the bearded man standing on the spot with a dumbfounded expression. A long time later, the bearded man finally snapped back to his senses. Turning around, he looked at Nianqi in disbelief and asked, The morning you mentioned, Mr. Mo, is this morning? That's right. Nianqi nodded. Wait here for 6 hours and it'll be done. 6 hours is enough to refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon. I don't have to fast for 3 days, bathe, adjust my condition or pray to the heavens. Isn't that too perfunctory? The bearded man asked a bunch of questions in a single breath and Nianqi was stunned speechless for a long time. When the bearded man saw that the young lady was confused as well, he said in a deep voice, I won't say anything else but one thing. If Mr. Mo fails the spirit gathering, Nianqi replied, Young master won't fail. The bearded man. Chapter 268. Before long, A shadow appeared in the night sky and the sound of wings flapping could be heard. A large group of Azure Falcon guards arrived. They were densely packed and covered the skies, almost surrounding Mo's spirit weapon workshop. "Greetings, Commander." Many Azure Falcon guards rode on their gigantic Azure Falcons and cupped their fists at the same time, shouting in unison. Everyone swept their gazes across the courtyard and could not help but feel shocked at the tragic battlefield. The bearded man nodded and waved his hand. "Take this corpse away. You guys can leave first. I'll guard this place for the night to prevent any more bandits from coming to assassinate Mr. Mo." "Understood." On the surface, many Azure Falcon guards agreed. In reality, everyone was muttering in their hearts. Although Mo Ling's reputation had been flourishing in the capital in recent years, there was no need for the bearded man to guard this place personally as the commander of the Azure Falcon guards. Now that the bearded man had taken such a stance, Mo Ling's status in everyone's hearts rose once more. Before long, the Azure Falcon guards retreated. The only ones left in the courtyard were the bearded man, Nian Qi, and Night Spirit, who was sprawled in a corner with half-closed eyes, as though he was taking a nap. The wait was torturous. The bearded man's gaze was fixed on Su Zimo's secret chamber the entire time. He had never felt that a night could be so long. 6 hours passed in that silent night. When the sun rose and the clouds broke through the fog, the door to the secret chamber opened with a creak. Su Zimo strode out with a gigantic hammer in his hands. The bearded man bounced up from his chair and strode towards Su Zimo with an excited expression. When he arrived, the bearded man took the hammer from Su Zimo's hands and felt his arm sink. If he did not use all his strength, he would fall. The weight was sufficient. The bearded man nodded to himself. Focusing his gaze, the bearded man saw 4 patterns etched on the surface of the hammer that were intricate and beautiful. Could it be? The bearded man's eyes lit up as he channeled his Jin Dan and injected spirit energy. Swoosh! The hammer shone brightly and an aura as thick as the heavens and earth spread out. The 4 spirit patterns were dazzling. A supreme-grade spirit weapon. The bearded man was elated and could not conceal the excitement in his eyes. Bowing deeply to Su Zimo, he said sincerely, "Thank you, Mr. Mo." For Su Zimo, refining a supreme-grade spirit weapon was a piece of cake. However, in the eyes of the bearded man, this favor was way too great. The curly bearded man said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, Mr. Mo. From today onwards, as long as it's my Azure Falcon guards patrolling, I'll definitely walk around here more often. If I discover any abnormalities, I'll be able to rush over immediately." Su Zimo smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, sir." The next morning, the assassination attempt at Mo's spirit weapon workshop last night had already spread through the capital and caused a huge uproar. In this world, there was no wall that didn't have a crack. Moreover, it happened in the royal city. Last night, Mo's spirit weapon workshop shone with a dazzling formation light, illuminating the surroundings as though it was daytime and waking countless people up. "Have you heard? I heard that perfected being Jin Dan tried to assassinate Mr. Mo last night but failed. Instead, he died at the banks of Jishui River." "That's right. I heard that even the commander of the Azure Falcon guards was alerted. I saw it with my own eyes. Some Azure Falcon guards carried a corpse out. The corpse was beyond recognition and was completely dead," a cultivator said in a matter-of-fact manner. Some cultivators claimed to have seen Mr. Mo and even said that he was a Foundation establishment cultivator. "Fufu, now it's clear that Mr. Mo is definitely perfected being Jin Dan. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived the night. I've already said that Mr. Mo is perfected being Jin Dan. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to refine superior grade or even supreme grade spirit weapons." In the streets, alleys, taverns, tea houses, and stalls, almost everyone was discussing this matter. In the palace, a middle-aged man in yellow robes leaned back on the dragon throne with a booklet that had just been presented before him. His gaze was deep and his broad forehead revealed his extraordinary intelligence. Behind the middle-aged man stood a scholarly man with a calm expression. His gaze was reserved and his cultivation was unfathomable. The yellow-robed man was the Emperor of Great Zhou. Not far in front of the Emperor of Great Zhou, an armored perfected being Jin Dan knelt on one knee. His face was dark and his beard was curly. He was the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards who saved Su Zimo last night. Earlier on, The curly-bearded man was summoned by the Emperor of Great Zhou for an audience and recounted everything that happened last night without hiding anything. In that case, Mo Ling can truly refine supreme great spirit weapons? The Emperor of Great Zhou closed his eyes and pondered for a moment before opening them. His gaze was bright as he asked slowly with a doubtful tone. Yes, the curly-bearded man replied. Not only was he able to refine supreme-grade spirit weapons, he only used 6 hours. Furthermore, I feel that be it Mr. Mo or his maidservant, they are 100% confident in spirit gathering. 100% spirit gathering? The Emperor of Great Zhou murmured softly and narrowed his eyes. If that was the case, it would be enough to shock the entire cultivation world. Perfected Lord Mingzhe, what do you think? The Emperor of Great Zhou glanced sideways. The fact that he was addressed as a perfected lord meant that he was already at the nascent soul realm. The scholarly man standing behind him said, in Tianhuang mainland, the most skilled weapon refinement sects are 100 refinement sect. It's said that 100 refinement sect does have secret skills that can increase the success rate of spirit gathering. However, it's definitely impossible for it to be 100%. The Emperor of Great Zhou nodded. This person should have some sort of unique spirit gathering technique. Although he can't have a 100% success rate, the success rate is definitely extremely high. Fufu, not bad. This Mo Ling is quite something. The Emperor of Great Zhou smiled and nodded slightly with a hint of admiration in his eyes. Your Majesty, are you tempted by this talent? Perfected Lord Mingzhe asked with a smile. That's right. The Emperor of Great Zhou said. After a while, I'll find some time to head to Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop to meet this person. Perfected Lord Mingzhe frowned slightly and advised. Your Majesty, you're the Emperor. Even if this lad is someone important, it's not worth it for you to take the initiative to meet him. Just summon him to the capital. Furthermore, even if this person can refine supreme-grade spirit weapons, he's only a weapon refinement master. As long as his cultivation isn't at nascent soul realm, he won't be able to refine dermic weapons and naturally won't be able to become a weapon refinement master. Reaching nascent soul realm meant that a cultivator had taken another important step in their path of cultivation. When the Jin Dan was perfected, it meant that the path of core formation had come to an end. The Jin Dan was born in the Dantian, round and golden like a placenta. Only by shattering the Jin Dan could the infant within be born successfully and achieve a breakthrough in his cultivation realm, obtaining a new life. And this infant was the so-called nascent soul in the world of cultivation. That was the reason why there was a saying in the cultivation world about the birth of a nascent soul after shattering the core. Jining Zhenjuan had completely broken away from the scope of spirit energy and was beginning to control another type of power, dermic power. It was a power that was even stronger and more terrifying than spirit energy. The so-called dermic arts could only be released by Jining Zhenjuan. As for Jining Zhenjuan's weapons, they were dermic weapons. In the world of weapon refinement, only cultivators who could refine dermic weapons could be called weapon refinement masters. That was the reason why Perfected Lord Mingzhe said bluntly that Su Zimo was still unable to refine dermic weapons due to the limitations of his cultivation realm, and was not worthy of the Emperor of Great Zhou's high regard to meet him. Chapter 269. No matter how strong a spirit weapon was, it would only attract the attention of perfected Jin Dan. However, for the Great Zhou dynasty that ruled over the 4 directions, perfected Jin Dan was merely the backbone. The main pillar was still Jining Zhenjuan, a void reversion or even an existence stronger than that. When he heard perfected Lord Mingzhe's words, the Emperor was indifferent and shook his head. Mingzhe, you're wrong. What I value is not his current capabilities, but his potential. Perfected Lord Mingzhe nodded thoughtfully. The Emperor's eyes shone with a wise glint as he continued. The fact that he has achieved his current accomplishments at such a young age further proves that his talent in weapon refinement is unprecedented. His potential in weapon refinement is unimaginable. Your Majesty, I understand. Perfected Lord Mingzhe bowed. Fufu, the Emperor chuckled softly and praised. To be able to refine supreme-grade spirit weapons at Foundation Establishment Realm, this Mo Ling is truly a heavenly. Suddenly, the Emperor's expression changed and his voice stopped abruptly. The Emperor's smile froze on his face. The bearded man raised his head and perfected Lord Mingzhe glanced sideways. Both of them sensed the emperor's abnormality at the same time. Perfected Lord Mingzhe asked in concern, "What's wrong, Your Majesty?" The emperor narrowed his eyes and tapped his fingers on the table in deep thought. A long time later, he suddenly asked, "Dongqing, just now, you're saying that this Mo Ling is only a foundation establishment cultivator?" "That's right." The bearded man was stunned for a moment before nodding hurriedly. "Your Majesty, there's no way I'm wrong. He's at late-stage foundation establishment." The emperor took a deep breath and asked slowly, "Can anyone tell me how a foundation establishment cultivator managed to survive for 10 breaths against the combined assassination of 2 perfected Jindan cultivators?" Suddenly the hall went silent. The bearded man was dumbfounded and perfected Lord Mingzhe was equally shocked. If the emperor had not mentioned it, neither of them would have noticed this detail. Last night, the bearded man was only focused on his supreme-grade spirit weapon, and did not think much about it. At that moment, the bearded man suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of fear and could not help but gulp. Furthermore, by the time I arrived, one of the perfected Jindan cultivators was already dead. Leaning back in his chair, the emperor seemed to have discovered something interesting as he smiled leisurely with a deep gaze. "That's right, who can explain this? A late-stage foundation establishment, early-stage foundation establishment, and an early-stage foundation establishment black dog. Not only did he manage to survive for 10 breaths against 2 perfected cultivators, he even managed to kill one of them?" The bearded man and perfected Lord Mingzhe cultivators, I'm Jindan. The emperor stood, Lord Jindan cultivator, Lord Ming Jindan cultivator Jin, and Jin Lord, Mr. Jin cultivators Lord perfected Lord Ming Jin Ming Z Ming. Nothing, the bearded man shook his head. The emperor sneered, "Although there's no evidence, there's a high chance that it was done by True Fire Weapon Workshop, right? Your Majesty is wise." The bearded man cupped his fists, hands behind his back. The emperor had a dignified expression and a shuddering chill emanated from his eyes. "Draw up a notice for me and post it. Right. If any more thieves dare to plot against the capital and assassinate talents, kill them without mercy. The mastermind behind them will not be able to escape death as well." The wrath of the emperor could cause 1,000,000 corpses to fall. The emperor exuded a murderous aura that was shuddering. The bearded man agreed loudly. Perfected Lord Mingzhe's heart skipped a beat. Although there was no mention of Mo Ling's name in the notice, anyone could tell that the virtuous talent in the notice was Mo Ling, given the fact that the assassination attempt had just taken place last night. On the surface, this assassination attempt seemed to be a conflict between 2 major crafting workshops. However, in reality it was a conflict between Mo Ling and True Fire Sect. Under normal circumstances, True Fire Sect was one of the 5 major sects and possessed immense power with a strong foundation. The Emperor of Great Zhou would turn a blind eye to this matter if he did not express his stance. However, the moment the notice was posted, it was a clear indication of his stance. The Emperor of Great Zhou's stance towards this matter. The Emperor of Great Zhou had chosen Mo Ling's side. "Seems like Your Majesty really thinks highly of this person," perfected Lord Mingzhe thought to himself. The bearded man thought for a moment and asked again, "Where should I post this notice?" The emperor replied indifferently, "Yongxing City, at the entrance of True Fire Weapon Workshop. Post." The bearded man sucked in a breath of cold air. This was no longer a mere statement, it was a warning. A warning to True Fire Weapon Workshop not to act rashly in the future. Although the emperor did not state the matter explicitly out of respect for True Fire Sect, his intention was clear enough by choosing to post the notice at the entrance of True Fire Weapon Workshop, Yongxing City. Ever since Su Zimo started customizing supreme-grade spirit weapons, the weapon workshops here regained their liveliness, and the number of people increased gradually. After all, supreme-grade spirit weapons were out of reach for most cultivators. If they wanted to refine inferior-grade, middle-grade and superior-grade spirit weapons, they would have to come here. Actually, True Fire Weapon Workshop isn't doing the right thing. Although nobody knew the identities of the 2 dead perfected Jindan, most cultivators were well aware. In the capital, True Fire Weapon Workshop was the only one that was at odds with most Spirit Weapon Workshop, and had the ability to order perfected Jindan around. That's right. We're also a weapon workshop and are competitors with most spirit weapon workshop. But then again, there's nothing wrong with them establishing their reputation with their own capabilities. Furthermore, Mr. Mo is now in the business of supreme-grade spirit weapons. There's no conflict with us. The shopkeepers of the weapon forging workshop gathered together and discussed in low voices. I reckon that this matter will most likely be left unsettled. Furthermore, there's no evidence left. Yes, True Fire Weapon Workshop represents one of the 5 major sects, True Fire Sect. There's no way the Great Zhou dynasty will offend a major sect for a single weapon refinement master. In my opinion, this matter isn't over yet. One of the shopkeepers' words were shocking. Old Zhang, what do you mean? Another person asked. Old Zhang sneered, think about it. True Fire Weapon Workshop lost 2 perfected Jindan and suffered a huge setback. How can they tolerate that? If they can't tolerate it, what else can they do? They can't possibly send Jining Xinjuan to do it, right? Another person was shocked. That's hard to say. As the few of them discussed together, a figure tore through the skies not far away. It was extremely fast and arrived before them in the blink of an eye. Greetings, sir. The few shopkeepers stood up hurriedly and greeted. The person who had arrived was the commander of the Azure Falcon Guards, the bearded man. Someone asked with a smile, sir, why are you here? Do you want to customize a spirit weapon? The bearded man did not reply. Waving his sleeves, a thick spirit energy enveloped a tall notice steel and lifted it off the ground. The bearded man was expressionless and said nothing as he walked forward with the notice steel, attracting countless gazes. Chapter 270. True Fire Weapon Forging Workshop Rear Hall. Elder Zhang didn't sleep the entire night. This night was too torturous for him. He had failed. The assassination that had been planned for so long had actually failed. Although Liang Dan and Meng Han were nearing the end of their lifespans, they were still perfected Jin Dan after all. Elder Zhang could not take this lying down. Not only did this concern the rise and fall of True Fire Weapon Workshop, it also concerned True Fire Sect's reputation. The shopkeeper of True Fire Weapon Workshop, Gu Yong, walked into the back hall. When he saw Elder Zhang's soulless expression, he could not help but sigh inwardly. He went forward and advised Elder Zhang, you should rest for a while. Almost an entire day has passed. News of what happened last night has spread, right? After a while, Elder Zhang's lips moved as he asked. Gu Yong nodded with an ugly expression. Elder Zhang's face was filled with hostility. He slowly clenched his fist and said hatefully, even if you don't say it, I can guess it. The people outside must be rejoicing in our misfortune, laughing at our True Fire sect. Gu Yong, let me tell you, I didn't lose. True Fire Weapon Workshop didn't lose either. True Fire sect won't lose either. Gu Yong saw that Elder Zhang seemed to have been stimulated too much and had already fallen into a deranged state. He hurriedly said, Elder Zhang, things have already come to this. Elder Zhang interrupted Gu Yong and said coldly, I'll send a message to the sect and get them to send even stronger cultivators over. We must kill Mo Ling in the capital. Gu Yong vaguely felt that Elder Zhang had lost his mind, but he couldn't say it out loud. He could only say tactfully, this is a serious matter. The sect may not agree, right? The sect will definitely agree. When had True Fire Sect ever suffered such a loss? How could he be frightened by a little artificer of unknown origin? With a cold snort, Elder Zhang continued, after 2 years of observation, I dare to conclude that Mo Ling has definitely mastered a unique spirit gathering technique with an extremely high success rate. After killing Mo Ling, this spirit gathering technique naturally belongs to our True Fire sect. But last night's incident has alarmed the Azure Falcon Guards. I'm sure the Emperor of Great Zhou already knows about this. It's not good for us to make a move in the capital, is it? Gu Yong frowned slightly. Don't worry. Elder Zhang replied. The Emperor of Great Zhou will definitely not interfere in this matter out of respect for True Fire Sect. Rumble. Just as Elder Zhang finished speaking, an earth-shattering sound came from outside the door, as if a meteorite had fallen and smashed right at the entrance of True Fire Weapon Workshop. Elder Zhang frowned slightly. He waved his hand and said, Go take a look and see what's going on outside. I'll write a letter right away. Yes. Gu Yong turned around and left. With a dark expression, Elder Zhang took out a letter from his storage bag and scribbled furiously. Not long after Gu Yong left, he panted and ran into the back hall with a panicked expression. Elder Zhang picked up the letter he had just written and shook the ink off. He handed it to Gu Yong and said, "Send this letter back to the sect as soon as possible." This? Gu Yong did not take it. His face was pale, and he wanted to say something but hesitated. What happened outside?" Elder Zhang asked with a frown. Gu Yong smiled bitterly. "Elder Zhang, you should go out and take a look yourself." Holding the letter in his left hand, Elder Zhang strode out of the door with a grim expression. Before he reached the entrance, Elder Zhang heard a commotion outside True Fire Weapon Workshop, as though countless people had gathered and were discussing fervently. This time round, True Fire Weapon Workshop has truly suffered a huge setback. That's right, it's utterly embarrassing. It's a crushing defeat. I wonder who came up with the idea to assassinate Mr. Mo. That person should be the greatest sinner of True Fire sect. A series of chaotic voices could be heard and Elder Zhang's expression turned increasingly terrible. The moment he stepped out of the door of True Fire Weapon Workshop, the commotion outside quietened down significantly. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Everyone turned their heads and looked at Elder Zhang with a strange look in their eyes as they whispered to each other. Elder Zhang looked around. In the end, his gaze landed on a tall notice stone tablet opposite him. There was a brand new notice pasted on it. "If there are any more thieves who dare to plot against the capital and assassinate talents, they will be killed without mercy. The mastermind behind them will not be able to escape death as well." It was a murderous sentence. At the end of the notice was a square pattern. It was the Emperor's Jade Seal. When he saw that sentence and the pattern of the Emperor's Jade Seal, Elder Zhang felt as though he was struck by lightning. Feeling dizzy, his body swayed and he nearly fell. Gu Yong hurried forward to support Elder Zhang. After a moment, Elder Zhang took a deep breath of air and looked at the bearded man at the side, asking with difficulty, "May I ask, Lord Commander, is this notice truly the will of the king?" "What do you mean by that, Elder Zhang? Are you suspecting that I'm faking the will of the emperor?" the bearded man asked expressionlessly. Elder Zhang's heart skipped a beat as he replied hurriedly, "No, I'm not." The bearded man harumphed coldly and turned to point at the jade stream pattern at the end of the notice, saying in a deep voice, "The emperor's jade seal has always been in the hands of the king. How dare you question it, Then why is the notice pasted here?" Before Elder Zhang could finish, he was interrupted by the bearded man. "The reason why it's pasted here is to tell those with ill intentions that under the feet of the Emperor of Great Zhou, even tigers had better crouch and dragons had better coil up. Don't even think about stirring up trouble." With every sentence that the bearded man said, Elder Zhang's face turned paler by a shade. In the end, Elder Zhang's gaze dimmed and he was completely disheartened. The letter that he had just written in his hands was also pulverized by his spirit energy. That letter was no longer useful. That was because not only had the Emperor of Great Zhou expressed his stance, he had even issued a stern warning to True Fire Weapon Workshop. If True Fire Weapon Workshop attacked Mo Ling again, they would not be offending anyone else, but the current Emperor of Great Zhou. With the notice pasted here, even some of the cultivators who were still in the dark realized that the mastermind behind the assassination last night was True Fire Weapon Workshop. It was truly a crushing defeat. Elder Zhang let out a long sigh and seemed to have aged instantly. Turning around, he entered True Fire Weapon Workshop with a lonely back view. For a moment, Elder Zhang regretted it. Perhaps, he should not have been blinded by greed and chose to assassinate Mo Ling back then. It was still noon and True Fire Weapon Workshop was closed long ago. Everyone dispersed one after another. However, the discussion about this matter did not die down. "Your Majesty is too much. Since the notice is already pasted at their door, he should just make it clear." "What do you know? True Fire Weapon Workshop represents True Fire Sect, one of the 5 major sections. They have been established for many years and their foundation is there. Even the Emperor of Great Zhou has to give them face. If they were to make it clear, it would be equivalent to falling out with True Fire Sect. There's no need for that." One of the cultivators laughed. "This notice is interesting. It doesn't mention True Fire Weapon Workshop or Mr. Mo at all. However, even a fool can tell what it's referring to." "That's right. Your Majesty is just short of saying that Mr. Mo will be under my protection in the capital from now on. From today onwards, I'm afraid no one in the capital will dare to target Mr. Mo anymore. Mo's spirit weapon workshop will also become an unshakable existence in the capital. Chapter 271. Mo's spirit weapon workshop. Su Zimo walked out of his room and squinted at the blazing noon sun in the skies. The fatigue in his eyes dissipated gradually. Su Zimo's body shuddered and a series of crackling sounds could be heard from within his body. It was as though someone was frying beans as his tendons and bones rang together, and his blood surged like a tsunami. Swoosh! Su Zimo opened his mouth and spat out a long stream of white qi that was condensed into a sword. It shot out a few meters before dissipating. In the myths and legends of the people, immortals could soar through the clouds and spit out flying swords to behead their enemies from 1,000 miles away. What happened earlier was extremely similar to the spitting of flying swords in the legends. If mortals who did not know how to cultivate were to witness this, they would probably be scared half to death. In reality, that stream of white qi was not a flying sword. It was only because Su Zimo's organs had strengthened after he cultivated the organs refinement section that there was the strange sight of him spitting out swords. Of course, that stream of white qi did not have any lethality, let alone behead an enemy from 1,000 miles away. After the assassination attempt last night and the refinement of a supreme-grade spirit weapon for the bearded man, Su Zimo did not sleep for the entire night and was mentally drained. He had rested for the entire morning and had just woken up. The injuries on his arm were healed and his mental state was as good as new. Su Zimo had just sat down on a stone bench in the courtyard when the door was pushed open. Nian Qi entered with a stick of candied fruits in her mouth. She was smiling as though she had encountered something fun. "Young master, you're awake." When Nian Qi caught sight of Su Zimo, her eyes sparkled as she called out. Su Zimo nodded and asked with a smile, "What happened? Look at how you're smiling." "I can't hide anything from you, young master." Nian Qi ran over with a smile and sat at the side. In 2 years, Nian Qi had changed tremendously, and it was not only in her cultivation realm. 2 years ago, when Nian Qi had just moved in, Su Zimo could sense that the lass was still extremely wary of him. As time passed, this kind of vigilance became less and less. Nian Qi also gradually became more cheerful and lively. Nian Qi said mysteriously, "Young master, guess what I saw in Yongxing City just now? Is it related to what happened last night?" Su Zimo raised his eyebrows and asked. Nian Qi's eyes widened as he nodded repeatedly. He then vividly described the emperor's announcement. "Young master, you didn't see the expression of that elder from True Fire Weapon Workshop. How satisfying." Su Zimo's eyes flashed with surprise. He did not expect the emperor of the Great Zhou dynasty to express his stance at this moment. "Young master, all the cultivators in Monarch City are talking about this. They all say that Mr. Mo can do whatever he wants in Monarch City from now on." Nian Qi imitated the tone of the people around him and spoke in a coarse voice. It was quite comical. Su Zimo smiled. Clang! 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 Right then a series of knocks sounded from the door. Su Zimo and Li Wuyo exchanged glances in confusion. It was already the middle of the month, and if they wanted to customize supreme-grade spirit weapons, they would have to wait until the beginning of next month. Why would anyone come at this time? Nian Qi ran over and opened the door. 2 cultivators stood at the door. One of them was a middle-aged man in yellow robes. He had a broad forehead, deep eyes and an extraordinary aura. The other person was more refined and his white robes fluttered as he stood half a step behind the former. Nian Qi frowned to himself. Her spirit-peering art could not detect their cultivation realms at all. There were only 2 possibilities. Firstly, the 2 of them had cultivated some sort of cultivation technique that concealed their cultivation realms. Secondly, their cultivation realms had already surpassed Jindan realm and were at nascent soul realm. The second possibility was eliminated by Nian Qi right away. As Jining Xinjuan, there was no reason for him to come here. Although Su Zimo could refine supreme-grade spirit weapons, he could not catch Jining Xinjuan's attention. "Fellow Taoists, why are you here today?" Nian Qi stood at the door and blocked the 2 of them. The yellow-robed man at the front smiled. "Young lady, this isn't how you treat your guests. You're blocking us from talking? What is it that you can't say outside?" Nianqi tilted her head and asked seriously. The two of them at the door looked at each other speechlessly and helplessly. The yellow-robed man smiled. Young lady, I'm here today because of your reputation. I'd like to meet Mr. Mo and ask for his help in refining a supreme-grade spirit weapon. No, before the yellow-robed man could finish, he was interrupted by Nianqi. Nianqi said, My young master only refines a single supreme-grade spirit weapon every month and will hold an auction at the beginning of the month. If you want to customize a supreme-grade spirit weapon, you'll have to come and bid at the beginning of next month. The yellow-robed man froze for a moment. For a long time, no one had dared to interrupt him and shut him out. A hint of anger flashed in the eyes of the elegant man behind him. He frowned slightly and said in a slightly reproachful tone, Girl, you, The yellow-robed man glanced sideways and stopped the scholarly man. Turning around, the yellow-robed man smiled. Young lady, tell me, what was the highest bid for a supreme-grade spirit weapon at the beginning of the month? Nianqi blurted out without thinking 2 million superior-grade spirit stones. All right, the yellow-robed man nodded. I'll pay double the price and ask Mr. Mo to help me refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon in private. 4 million. Nianqi was shocked. That was a frightening number. Most perfected Jindan cultivators would not be able to fork out that much. Unable to make up his mind, Nianqi looked towards Su Zimo in the courtyard instinctively. Su Zimo had a calm expression as he sipped his tea leisurely. Putting down his teacup, he nodded. Let them in. Nianqi made way in a flash and the two of them entered Mo's spirit weapon workshop. The moment they entered the courtyard, the yellow-robed man's gaze landed on Su Zimo and he nodded in greeting with a strange glint in his eyes. Sit. Su Zimo did not stand up either as he pointed to the stone bench opposite him and said. The yellow-robed man sat down while the scholarly man stood at the side and surveyed the surroundings. His gaze paused on Night Spirit for a brief moment as his gaze flickered. Su Zimo looked at the yellow-robed man and asked in a seemingly casual manner, How should I address you, fellow Taoist? My surname is Zhou. The yellow-robed man's expression did not change. Su Zimo nodded without saying anything. The yellow-robed man smiled gently and asked, I've heard a lot about you. Mr. Mo, may I know which sect you're from and who your master is with your weapon refinement skills? Su Zimo raised his head and toyed with the teacup in his hands. He looked at the yellow-robed man with a fake smile and asked instead, Fellow Taoist, don't you want to refine weapons? What's your motive for asking about my background now? You're overthinking, Mr. Mo. I was just curious and asked instinctively. The yellow-robed man's expression was normal, as though it was truly a casual question. The yellow-robed man nodded to the scholarly man beside him. The scholarly man took out 30 sets of weapon refinement materials and 4 million superior-grade spirit weapons from his storage bag, placing them in front of Su Zimo. Chapter 272. Mr. Mo, please check it. The yellow-robed man raised his chin and glanced at Su Zimo, indicating for him to check the materials and spirit stones in his storage bag. A faint smile appeared on Su Zimo's lips as he said in a seemingly casual manner, Fellow Taoist, you sure are generous. Ordinary cultivators won't be able to fork out so many materials and spirit stones. The yellow-robed man's expression was unchanged and he did not explain, merely stating his request. After pondering for a moment, the yellow-robed man continued, After this supreme-grade flying sword is refined, leave it with Mr. Mo first. Someone will come and retrieve it when the time comes. A year's time limit. Overdue will not be accepted. Su Zimo said indifferently. The sect competition was less than a year away. By then, he would have left the capital long ago. The yellow-robed man stood up and bade farewell, leaving with the scholarly man. After leaving Mo's spirit weapon workshop and walking to the main street, the yellow-robed man turned around and looked in the direction of Mo's spirit weapon workshop with interest, his eyes shining brightly. The yellow-robed man was the current emperor of Great Zhou. The scholarly man behind him was perfected Lord Mingzhe. If I hadn't seen it for myself, I would have found it hard to believe that someone who could refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon is such a young junior. The emperor lamented without concealing the admiration in his eyes. Perfected Lord Mingzhe nodded. Furthermore, that person's cultivation is indeed only at late-stage foundation establishment, and he did not cultivate any cultivation technique to conceal his cultivation realm. There was no one else in the courtyard either. There were many mysteries surrounding Mo Ling. However, what the emperor was most curious about was the assassination attempt last night. Given Mo Ling's cultivation realm, it was almost certain death. How did he manage to survive for 10 breaths and even kill a perfected Jin Dan instead? Initially, the emperor had two guesses. First, Mo Ling cultivated some sort of cultivation technique to conceal his cultivation realm, and his actual cultivation realm was at Jin Dan realm. Second, there was an expert hidden in Mo's spirit weapon workshop. The reason why the two of them came today was partly to take a look at Mo Ling, and partly to resolve this mystery. However, after leaving Mo's spirit weapon workshop, the two of them were even more puzzled. Neither of these two speculations was consistent with the situation. Their visit was sudden. The two of them used their divine consciousness to carefully search Mo's spirit weapon workshop, but did not find any trace of a third person. In other words, everything was back to square one. How did two foundation establishment cultivators and a black dog of the foundation establishment stage survive for 10 breaths under the full force of two Jin Dan immortals? Interesting. What an enigma. The emperor smiled and asked again, "What else did you discover?" Perfected Lord Mingzhe said deeply, "That black dog is not simple. Although it was sprawled far away and looked like it was about to fall asleep, I could sense that it was watching us the entire time." Can you tell what kind of spirit demon it is? No. Perhaps it's a mutated spirit demon born from the union of two different species of spirit demons. The two of them chatted as they walked and soon arrived at the palace. At the entrance of the palace, a black armored guard quickly walked over. Kneeling down on one knee, he reported in a deep voice, "Reporting to my king, this subordinate has already investigated Mo Ling's identity and background. The results are minimal." The emperor asked, "Oh? What did you find out? Tell me." The guard replied, 2 years ago, Mo Ling seemed to have appeared out of thin air outside the capital. Nobody saw how he arrived. That's all? That's all. The emperor frowned. It was almost the same as not investigating at all. All of a sudden, a thought flashed through the emperor's mind as he suddenly asked, 2 years ago, was Mo Ling's appearance in the capital the same day as the invasion of the dragons? Yes. The guard nodded. Not long after Mo Ling appeared, the divine dragon descended. Thereafter, a mysterious expert struck and repelled the divine dragon. When he heard that, Perfected Lord Mingzhe gradually came to a realization as his eyes lit up. "Your Majesty, you're guessing that Mo Ling is related to that mysterious expert?" "Yes, Mo Ling. Might even be the disciple of that mysterious expert," the emperor said in a deep voice. "Given the methods of that mysterious expert, even if his disciple is at Foundation Establishment realm, it's highly possible for him to survive for 10 breaths against the assassination of two Jin Dan immortals." Perfected Lord Mingzhe nodded. The sudden appearance of that mysterious expert means that he's definitely not someone from the capital of Great Zhou. In that case, Mo Ling might truly be related to that mysterious expert. The emperor smiled. Someone like that is a true genius of cultivation and is much stronger than any random Tom, Dick, or Harry. Right, when will Shuai return? Don't worry, Your Majesty. The sect competition is less than a year away and the third princess will definitely return early. Perfected Lord Mingzhe consoled. The emperor frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "Because of that Su something Zimo, Shuai has been at odds with me. It's been so many years and she hasn't even returned home to take a look." Seriously, as though he recalled something, Perfected Lord Mingzhe asked, "Your Majesty, you're suddenly mentioning the third princess. Don't tell me you're thinking of introducing Mo Ling to her so that they can become Dao companions?" "I do have that intention," the emperor replied. "At the very least, in my eyes, this Mo Ling is worthy of Shuai. He's much better than that unknown Su Zimo that Shuai mentioned previously. Fufu, the son of a general of a vassal state and a piece of trash without a spirit root, wants to get close to my Ji family?" "Yes, both of them are of similar age and cultivation realms. Furthermore, Mo Ling is a top-tier weapon refinement master. They're quite compatible." Perfected Lord Mingzhe nodded. The emperor sneered, "Shuai is just too naive and narrow-minded. She was deceived by some glib-tongued people. When she returns, I'll let her meet Mo Ling." Even if they're not compatible, it'll broaden her horizons and let her see what a true genius is like. Perfected Lord Mingze said, Your Majesty is generous with your praises. Seems like you truly think highly of this person. Yes, the Emperor nodded. Just now, you've heard my conversation with him as well. Initially, I wanted to test his background, but I didn't expect him to be so sharp. Not only did he respond with ease, he even tried to dig out my identity. Fufu. The Emperor chuckled. It's truly not easy for someone his age to have such a temperament and wisdom. That's right, Perfected Lord Mingze commented as well. That lad has a calm temperament and is calm as a lake despite having a thunderstorm in his chest. The Emperor continued, furthermore, that Su Zimo was chosen by Schwerer herself after all. If he's half, no, a tenth of Mo Ling, it's not impossible for them to become Dao companions. Right, he couldn't have seen through our identities, right? The Emperor asked in a joking manner. How is that possible? Perfected Lord Mingze shook his head with a smile. If he could see through your identity with a single interaction, he wouldn't be a genius, but a monster incarnate. Chapter 273. Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop. Nianqi sat opposite Su Zimo and praised, Young Master, you're amazing. Even cultivators from other places are coming here because of your reputation. How do you know that they're from other places? Su Zimo asked with a smile. Nianqi replied, Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop has already been open for 2 years. It's clear that the two of them don't know our rules by visiting us in the middle of this month. They're most likely not from the capital, but cultivators from other places. Fu, you're really mistaken. Su Zimo smiled gently and shook his head. Not only are they from the capital, they're from the palace. Someone from the palace? Nianqi was shocked and probed. Could they be royalty? Su Zimo nodded. The yellow-robed man in the lead is not simple. He has an aura of wealth that ordinary cultivators don't possess. He's so generous and offered 4 million superior-grade spirit weapons the moment he opened his mouth. Ordinary cultivators don't have that sort of capability. Nianqi nodded as though he understood. Su Zimo continued, furthermore, there's an intimidating aura between his brows. Although he's trying to hide it, it's an aura that's condensed from being in a high position for a long time and is difficult to conceal. Oh, Nianqi revealed a look of realization and said, No wonder I felt that the yellow-robed man's aura was extremely strong. Every single word and action of his was filled with authority. Nianqi supported his chin with one arm and fell into deep thought, as though he had thought of something difficult. Su Zimo smiled and did not disturb him. Dipping his finger in the tea, he wrote 2 words on the table and stood up to leave. The royal family's surname is Ji, but that person said that his surname is Zhou. Could he be lying? Nianqi was deep in thought as he murmured, Zhou Zhou Zhou. After a while, Nianqi's gaze shifted and landed on the table by accident. He caught sight of the 2 words that had yet to dry up, emitting a faint tea fragrance. Tianzi, Nianqi exclaimed as he vaguely realized something. After the emperor's announcement appeared, the royal city indeed calmed down. No one dared to provoke the imperial family at this time. On the other hand, Mo Spirit Weapon Workshop status in the capital was rising day by day, and so was its reputation. The auction at the beginning of every month would attract many perfected Jindan cultivators. Most of them were late Jindan cultivators and perfected Jindan cultivators. These Jindan perfected masters were either very powerful or had strong backgrounds. Otherwise, they would not have been able to accumulate so many spirit stones. A few months later, there were even foreign cultivators who traveled thousands of kilometers to bid for a supreme-grade spirit weapon in Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. Naturally, the guesses and rumors about Mo Ling's identity, appearance and background had never stopped. Many cultivators claimed that they had seen Mo Ling and were proud of him. However, their descriptions of Mo Ling were different. There were all kinds of strange versions. There were only a few pieces of information that were acknowledged by the masses. First, Mr. Mo was a perfected Jindan cultivator with extraordinary strength. Apart from the descriptions of some cultivators, the reason for that was because of the assassination attempt a few months ago was also because of that night. Second, Mr. Mo had a unique spirit gathering technique that had an extremely high success rate. Everyone agreed with that point as well. Furthermore, everyone even gave that spirit gathering technique a name, Emo Clan's spirit gathering technique. Third, Mr. Emo was definitely one of the people that could not be offended in the capital. Even the Emperor of Great Zhou had specially announced that he was a talent. Even True Fire Weapon Workshop, which was backed by True Fire Sect, suffered a huge setback because of this. Who in the capital of Great Zhou would dare to offend Mr. Mo? Furthermore, anyone who offended Mr. Mo could forget about customizing supreme-grade spirit weapons in Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop. Su Zimo could not be bothered to explain the rumors and ignored them. Of course, he did not intend to hide his identity either. It was just that he had been living in seclusion for the past 2 years and rarely showed himself. That was why he gave off an extremely mysterious vibe. After 2 years of tough cultivation, Su Zimo's gains were immense. Due to the large amount of spirit stones, Su Zimo's cultivation realm was already close to perfected foundation establishment. Although that cultivation speed was a little terrifying, it was within reason. It was already extremely fortunate for foundation establishment cultivators to have sufficient middle-grade spirit stones for their cultivation. However, Su Zimo had an endless supply of superior-grade spirit stones for his cultivation, and was naturally able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Another aspect was his weapon refinement. To outsiders, Su Zimo could only refine a single supreme-grade spirit weapon a month. However, in reality, Su Zimo would refine a supreme-grade spirit weapon every afternoon to continue honing his skills. As time passed by and he practiced continuously, Su Zimo's weapon refinement skills became more and more proficient. He was already at the pinnacle of perfection, and it was difficult for him to improve further. At that moment, Su Zimo also realized that it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to refine a perfect spirit weapon. Success was only possible when one's skills, mentality, environment, and various other factors were combined. Since it was perfect, it meant that there could not be any flaws from the first step of weapon refinement right from the selection of materials. There could not be any mistakes all the way until the final quenching. Otherwise, even the slightest mistake would not be considered perfect. Initially, Su Zimo intended to refine a set of perfect-grade flying swords to release sword formations. But now, seeing that things were not going to work out, Su Zimo could only settle for the next best thing. A set of supreme-grade flying swords. Of course, what was second in Su Zimo's eyes was the best in the eyes of others. A single supreme-grade spirit weapon would attract countless top Jin Dan perfected beings to fight for it. A set of supreme-grade flying swords would most likely lead to a huge battle. This day, Su Zimo walked out of his room with a faint smile on his face. There was still more than a month to the sect competition, and the essence energy of the dragon egg within his body was finally refined and absorbed by his body. He had attained greater mastery of the organs refinement section. The qi of his 5 organs circulated endlessly, nourishing his skin, flesh, tendons, bones, and marrow, forming a small cycle within his body. Prior to this, when Su Zimo attained lesser mastery of the organs refinement section, he released his power of blood qi and attacked with all his might. In Dongling Valley, he even killed the blood-robed youth who was at 4 Meridian Foundation establishment. But now, Su Zimo estimated that even without releasing his demonic qi or channeling his bloodline, he could suppress 4 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators with his physical strength alone. If he channeled his bloodline, it would be more than enough to suppress 5 Meridian Foundation establishment cultivators. If he released his blood qi at the same time, Su Zimo's combat strength would be even more frightening. Of course, that was only in terms of strength. After all, the battlefield was ever-changing and there were too many factors that could affect the outcome. As for refining the essence energy of the dragon egg, it could be said that he had resolved the hidden danger of being hunted down by dragons. Prior to this, Su Zimo did not even dare to step out of the capital. But now, Su Zimo felt as though he was relieved of a burden and freed from his shackles. He could not help but be in a great mood. "Young master, what are you so happy about?" Nian Qi hugged his knees and sat on the grass, tilting his head and asking with watery eyes. For the past 3 years, it was rare for Nian Qi to see Su Zimo smile as such. Su Zimo waved his hand. "Let's go out for a walk and get some fresh air." "Sure." Nian Qi clapped and leaped up from the ground with a bright smile. Chapter 274. Ever since Nianqi moved in, this was the first time the two of them were going out together. 3 years had passed and there were not many changes in the capital. The only difference was that the number of cultivators increased significantly as the sect competition approached and people came and went. After 3 years, Nianqi's hair was still yellow and curly, looking messy. However, she had grown increasingly beautiful. Slender and elegant, her skin was whiter than snow and was so tender that it seemed like water could be squeezed out of it. Even though Su Zimo could not be said to be extremely handsome, he had delicate features and a steady aura. His green robes fluttered in the wind, making him stand out from the crowd and exuding a unique charm. The woman was beautiful while the man was elegant. The man and woman walked on the long streets of the capital like a golden couple, attracting everyone's attention. Isn't that Nianqi's maidservant from Mo's Spirit Weapon Workshop? Some of the cultivators in the crowd had seen Nianqi before and recognized her. It really seems to be her. Who's that person beside her? He looks unfamiliar. I've never seen him before. I've got it. A cultivator said hatefully. That green-robed cultivator must be so close to fellow Taoist Nianqi because he wants to get close to Mr. Mo. That person is so scheming. Yes, that must be the case. Everyone was enlightened and nodded in agreement. That's a good idea. To think that that person would beat us to it. Even though there was a commotion around them, Su Zimo and Nianqi's ears were extremely sharp and they could still hear the discussions. Young master, they're so stupid. Nianqi whispered and pursed her lips into a smile. Right then, a timid voice sounded from the crowd. Actually, I have a feeling that that green-robed cultivator might be Mr. Mo as well. The moment the voice sounded, it attracted a wave of ridicule. Fellow Taoist, you're an outsider, right? If you don't know, listen more and speak less lest you embarrass yourself. Fellow Taoist, don't tell me you don't even know the spirit-peering art and can't tell the cultivation realm of that green-robed cultivator? Haha. Who in the capital doesn't know that Mr. Mo is perfected Jean Dan? Besides, Nianqi is Mr. Mo's maidservant. Have you ever seen a maidservant walking side by side with her master, talking and laughing without any regard for seniority? For the past 3 years, Su Zimo and Nianqi had been together day and night. In the eyes of outsiders, Nianqi was his maid. But Su Zimo had never seen Nianqi as a maid. When he was willing to take in Nianqi, it was only because he was moved by compassion. The two of them strolled along. Not long after, a young foundation establishment cultivator suddenly appeared in front of them. He flipped his hair and smiled at Nianqi, saying gently, Miss Nianqi, you must not be deceived by this person's flowery words. He definitely has other motives for approaching you. The young cultivator pointed at Su Zimo and said with an unfriendly expression. Su Zimo suspected that if they weren't in the capital, this cultivator might have charged up to fight him to the death. None of your business, go away. Nianqi hollered and pulled Su Zimo around that person, continuing forward. Is there anything interesting in the capital today? Let's go take a look. Su Zimo glanced sideways and asked. Something interesting. Pondering for a moment, Nianqi said, there's an elixir battle at Yongxing City today. It's said that 2 cultivators from True Fire Elixir Workshop and Azure Frost Elixir Workshop got into a conflict for some reason. Both parties agreed to decide the victor through elixir refinement today to see who can refine the higher grade elixir. The capital was on high alert as the sect competition approached. The 3 great protectors had changed from a single rotation to a 2x2 rotation. In other words, there were 2 guards guarding Monarch City every day. If there was even the slightest sign of trouble, they would rush over immediately. Under such circumstances, no cultivator or faction would dare to make a move in the capital. If they wanted to resolve their grudges, a competition of elixir and weapon refinement was a good way. Furthermore, this was a grudge between the cultivators of the 2 major elixir workshops in Yongxing City to begin with. It was even more reasonable for them to decide the victor through elixir refinement. True Fire Elixir Workshop, Azure Frost Elixir Workshop, Su Zimo murmured softly and smiled. Let's go and take a look. True Fire Elixir Workshop was backed by True Fire Sect, while Azure Frost Elixir Workshop was backed by Azure Frost Sect. Both of those sects were part of the 5 major sects and Su Zimo had some dealings with them. There was no need to talk about True Fire Sect. They had suffered a huge setback in his hands for the past 3 years. As for Azure Frost Sect, Jiaoxue was in Azure Frost sect and even invited him to join back then. However, Su Zimo rejected her. As for Su Xiaoning, she was cultivating an Azure Frost sect. Before long, the two of them arrived at Yongxing City. Hurry, let's go take a look. It has already begun. I heard that the person from True Fire Elixir Workshop is a genius of True Fire sect in recent years. His name is He Xing, and he will definitely have a place in the elixir ranking of the sect competition. I heard that the elixir refinement master of Azure Frost sect is a young woman who is unknown. I wonder how she has the courage to compete with He Xing. Following the crowd, Su Zimo and Nianqi arrived at their destination before long. In a corner of Yongxing City, there was an empty space in the middle of the crowd. At that moment, a man and woman were holding an elixir furnace and tossing ingredients into it continuously. The man had a dignified appearance, but his lips were extremely thin, as though he was a heartless person. While the man was smelting the herbs, his gaze landed on the woman beside him. He had a relaxed expression and sneered with a hint of mockery in his eyes. When Su Zimo looked at the woman, he could not help but shudder and almost exclaim. Even though it was only her side profile, Su Zimo recognized the woman. Su Xiaoning. The young woman who was competing with He Xing of True Fire sect in elixir refinement was Su Zimo's younger sister, Su Xiaoning, whom he had not seen for many years. Initially, Su Zimo thought that he would have to wait until the sect competition officially began before he could meet his younger sister again. To think that he would bump into her here today. What's wrong, young master? Nianqi was the closest to Su Zimo. Sensing that there was something wrong with Su Zimo's expression, he asked hurriedly. Nothing. With a smile, Su Zimo's gaze was gentle and warm as it landed on Su Xiaoning the entire time. After not seeing her for a few years, Su Xiaoning had grown up a lot. She had a slim figure and her long hair was draped over her singlet with a blue ribbon. Dressed in white robes that were spotless, she truly had the demeanor of an immortal cultivator. Actually, Su Zimo had been thinking about Xiaoning all these years. Xiaoning's spirit root was terrible. Even with Ji Yaoshua's help, she would have been bullied and looked down upon in the sect. Back then, if not for the fact that Su Zimo's future was uncertain, he would have definitely brought Xiaoning along with him. Su Zimo observed carefully. Xiaoning's cultivation had just entered the foundation establishment realm. It was already rather difficult for her to reach that realm within a few years because she had a pseudo-spirit root. It was not hard to imagine that Xiaoning must have suffered greatly in the process. Songqi had a pseudo-spirit root and could not enter foundation establishment realm even after cultivating for most of his life. What shocked Su Zimo the most was that Xiaoning had actually become an elixir refinement master. Su Zimo had some knowledge of elixir refinement and could naturally tell that Xiaoning was rather familiar with it. Furthermore, she was extremely focused throughout the entire process and was not affected by the outside world. She had the mental fortitude of a top elixir refinement master. Chapter 275. On the surface, there was only a single word difference between elixir refinement and weapon refinement. However, in reality there was a huge difference. Weapon refinement had an extremely high requirement for the level of the spirit fire. The higher the level of the spirit fire, the higher the efficiency and the better the effects of refining the impurities in the spirit materials. However, elixir refinement was different. Elixir refinement placed more emphasis on the control of the spirit fire. That was because spirit herbs were different from spirit materials like iron ores and had extremely low ignition points. Even a level 1 spirit fire could refine most of the spirit herbs. In elixir refinement, there were two refinements that required an extremely precise control of the temperature of the spirit fire. If the temperature was too high, it would be easy to burn the spirit herbs to ashes. If the temperature was too low, the essence of the spirit herbs could not be extracted. Even though elixir refinement did not require spirit gathering, it required an extremely deep understanding of thousands of spirit herbs. The higher the level of the elixir, the more complicated the recipe and the more things one would have to remember. True top elixir refinement grandmasters would even have to memorize billions of spirit herbs. On the empty ground, the elixir refinement master from True Fire Elixir Workshop, He Xing, had already cultivated a level 2 spirit fire, and was rather proficient in controlling flames. Although Su Xiaoning had only cultivated a level 1 spirit fire, She was not weaker than her opponent in terms of temperature control. Both of them were refining the most common spirit recovery elixir. Spirit recovery elixirs were used to recover spirit energy. There were 3 types of spirit recovery elixirs: Level 1, Level 2 and Level 3. Naturally, there was a huge difference in their effects. Both of them were refining Grade 2 spirit recovery elixirs, and there were as many as 28 types of spirit herbs in the recipe. There could not be any mistakes in the refinement of any of those 28 herbs, or the elixir formation would definitely fail in the end. He Xing's elixir refinement technique was clearly better. However, that person's gaze was extremely evil and would drift towards Su Xiaoning from time to time, scanning her from head to toe with a bold gaze. Su Zimo narrowed his eyes and a killing intent flashed through them. Sensing it, Nianqi looked at Su Zimo in surprise before looking at Su Xiaoning on the empty ground with a thoughtful expression. This He Xing's elixir refinement technique is decent, but his methods are somewhat despicable, a cultivator in the crowd muttered. Another person covered the former's mouth hurriedly. Show softer. You might get into trouble. Onlookers see things more clearly. Most cultivators could tell that He Xing's intention of giving Su Xiaoning such a look during the elixir refinement process was obvious. He was trying to disrupt Su Xiaoning's mind. During the process of refining pills, the greatest taboo was to be distracted. Regardless of whether it was refining or condensing the pill, the slightest fluctuation in his mind would result in failure. On the other hand, Su Xiaoning ignored He Xing's provocation. She concentrated on refining the herbs in her hands. She was serious, cautious, and careful. The concentration in her eyes was moving. To everyone, Su Xiaoning's alchemy skills were clearly not as brilliant as He Xing's. However, this level of focus was countless times stronger than He Xing's. Su Zimo nodded inwardly, feeling rather gratified. What grudges do these two have? Why are they fighting here? Su Zimo looked at a cultivator beside him and asked in a low voice. That person said, actually, it's not a big deal. I heard that it's because of an alchemy furnace. This female cultivator from Azure Frost sect took a liking to it first and had already paid the spirit stones. However, He Xing caught sight of it and wanted to pay double the spirit stones for the furnace. The female cultivator refused, and that's how a grudge was formed. Later on, He Xing caused trouble for the female cultivator multiple times. The female cultivator couldn't take it anymore, and decided to have an alchemy battle with this person. Su Zimo frowned. That woman is an elixir refinement master from Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. Are the other cultivators going to allow their fellow sect members to be bullied by True Fire Elixir Workshop? I don't know about that. That person shook his head. However, this He Xing has a strong background. He's the elixir refinement master with the most potential among the younger generation of True Fire sect. His brother He Jiang is extremely strong, and is said to be the #1 foundation establishment cultivator in True Fire sect. He's definitely going to enter the top 10 of the spirit ranking in this sect competition. One of the He brothers is skilled in elixir refinement, while the other has terrifying combat strength. Their existences that are revered by many in True Fire sect. I reckon that the owner of Azure Frost Elixir Workshop is wary of the relationship between the two sects, and is unwilling to offend He Xing. Su Zimo nodded expressionlessly, and no one could tell if he was happy or angry. In that short period of time, He Xing and Su Xiaoning had already begun the 4th step of elixir refinement, the 2nd refinement. When He Xing saw that Su Xiaoning was indifferent, his gaze turned even more brazen as he let out a series of strange laughter. As though she did not hear anything, Su Xiaoning glared at the elixir furnace before her. Using the spirit fire to control the temperature of the flames, she refined and purified the impurities in the essence of the herbs bit by bit. He Xing stood on the spot and laughed maniacally without stopping. Su Xiaoning did not say anything and merely focused on her elixir refinement. It was as though she had forgotten about everything and ignored everyone around her, immersing herself in her elixir refinement. It was clear who was superior. In terms of elixir refinement techniques, He Xing was slightly stronger than Su Xiaoning. However, at that moment in the eyes of everyone, He Xing was like a clown. The warm sunlight shone on the woman's body, and there seemed to be a rainbow of colors behind her. A thin layer of sweat appeared on the tip of the woman's nose and forehead, shining brightly and flawlessly. At that moment, a thought flashed through everyone's minds. This was elixir refinement. This was how elixir refinement masters should be. In the hands of this woman, elixir refinement seemed to have a soul and life. She was not refining elixirs but nurturing a new life. Looking at the woman's elixir refinement, everyone felt inexplicably touched. They could not help but immerse themselves in the world of elixir refinement masters and witness the birth of a new life. At that moment Su Zimo smiled. He was smiling happily. Xiaoning had finally found her own path. Su Zimo had dabbled in elixir refinement as well, and had even obtained the #1 position of Misty Peak's Elixir Peak back then. However, at that moment, he could not help but admit that he was far inferior to his sister in terms of elixir refinement. What he knew was merely the surface of elixir refinement. However, what Xiaoning knew was the true essence of elixir refinement. Gradually, an invisible aura began to form around Su Xiaoning, growing stronger and stronger. This was the aura of a top-tier elixir refinement master. He Xing's expression changed. Under the suppression of Su Xiaoning's aura, his heart was in a mess and the flames flickered, nearly incinerating the essence of the herbs in the elixir furnace. Taking a deep breath of air, He Xing composed himself and focused on elixir refinement. However, it was already too late. Su Xiaoning was the first to complete the second refinement. A rich medicinal fragrance wafted out of the elixir furnace. When everyone sniffed it, they felt invigorated and the spirit energy in their bodies stirred. Su Xiaoning closed her eyes and adjusted her breathing for a moment. When she opened them again, her gaze was resolute as she began elixir refinement. At that moment, He Xing had just completed his second refinement. Although there was a medicinal fragrance wafting out of He Xing's elixir furnace as well, it was faintly discernible and everyone did not feel anything when they sniffed it. If nothing went wrong, the quality of Su Xiaoning's elixir would definitely be better than He Xing's elixir after the refinement. Through the medicinal fragrance, the surrounding elixir refinement masters could vaguely tell that Su Xiaoning's elixir might even be able to refine a perfect elixir with 5 elixir patterns. Chapter 276. Junior Sister Xiaoning is going to win. Yes, Azure Frost Elixir Workshop is going to be famous this time round. Among the crowd, the disciples of Azure Frost Elixir Workshop discussed softly in high spirits. It's just a grade 2 elixir. Even if she can win this round, she won't be famous. Azure Frost Elixir Workshop's reputation is built over thousands of years. What has it got to do with her? The person who spoke was a female cultivator in a yellow dress. She had a voluptuous figure and her chin was raised slightly, revealing her slender and fair neck with a proud expression. It was clear that the yellow-dressed woman had a high status in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop. Upon hearing her words, the cultivators who were discussing just now shut up hurriedly with fear in their eyes. Senior Sister Yang is right. An Azure Frost Elixir Workshop disciple replied with a smile. On the other side, the disciples of True Fire Weapon Workshop were also watching the situation on the empty ground with grim expressions. Things aren't looking good. Senior brother, he is going to lose. Don't worry, that girl from Azure Frost sect won't be able to win today. Let's wait for senior brother he's signal. The person who spoke was dressed in light red robes. His lips were curled and his expression was cold. His name was Pang Ming and he was at Perfected Foundation Establishment. Beside him, there was a ferocious-looking spirit lion. It dug its paws into the ground and opened its mouth slightly, revealing its sharp fangs and claws. On the empty ground, the medicinal fragrance emitted from the elixir furnace in front of Su Xiaoning grew thicker and spread through the crowd. Through the holes of the elixir furnace, white smoke wafted out in spirals. The mist changed and Su Xiaoning's figure was faintly discernible, like a fairy who had descended into the mortal world. A white-haired old man sniffed the medicinal fragrance wafting over. Closing his eyes, he revealed an intoxicated expression and said slowly, "Based on my experience, the spirit regeneration pill of this girl from Azure Frost sect will definitely be perfect." Everyone was shocked when they heard that. This old man was the most famous advanced elixir refinement master in Yongxing City. If he dared to make such a claim, the outcome would not be too different. He Xing could also tell that he would definitely lose if this continued. He Xing's eyes shone brightly as he condensed his elixir and shot a glance at Pang Ming in the crowd. Pang Ming understood and patted the head of the spirit lion beside him. The spirit lion moved and growled deeply. Suddenly, it pounced forward and waved its paw towards the elixir furnace in front of Su Xiaoning. This change was too sudden. Not to mention Su Xiaoning, who was focused on refining pills. Even the onlookers did not expect it. After all, this was the capital of the Great Zhou dynasty and fighting was strictly forbidden. Now that the sect competition was approaching, the atmosphere was even more tense. Not far away, one of the three great guards, a scarlet vulture guard, was patrolling in midair with a long spear in hand and a cold expression. Nobody expected that the spirit lion of True Fire Elixir Workshop would jump out at this moment. Pa! The spirit lion easily sent Su Xiaoning's elixir furnace flying with a single slap. With a bang, the pill exploded in the alchemy cauldron, and black smoke surged out. It was obvious that the congealing of the pill had failed. In the process of condensing a pill, the greatest taboo was to be disturbed. Even the slightest fluctuation in one's state of mind could result in failure, not to mention that even the cauldron was sent flying. Ah! Su Xiaoning exclaimed and a flash of blood appeared on her arm. It was the spirit lion that sent the elixir furnace flying. Su Xiaoning's reaction was slightly slower and her arm was scratched by the spirit lion's claws. Although it was not serious, her clothes were stained red. The spirit lion knocked over the elixir furnace and injured someone before running back under Pang Ming's scolding. Coughing gently, Pang Ming said with a fake smile, "Fellow Taoist from Azure Frost Elixir Workshop, I'm truly sorry. I didn't discipline it properly and that beast actually ran out and disturbed you. I'll help you teach it a lesson right now." With that said, Pang Ming knocked the spirit lion's head with a moderate force. The spirit lion shook its head, oblivious to it, and even rubbed itself against Pang Ming's body. Haha! A series of laughter broke out from the crowd of True Fire Elixir Workshop. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that Pang Ming had intentionally ordered the spirit lion to injure someone and knock over the elixir furnace. Looking at the elixir furnace that had fallen to the ground not far away, Su Xiaoning pursed her lips and forgot about the pain in her arm. Her eyes reddened and gradually moistened. At that moment, the first thing that surged in Su Xiaoning's heart was not anger, but sorrow. Right from the beginning, she was not distracted at all, and was fully focused on refining the spirit regeneration elixir. She was not wrong. She was extremely focused. However, at the end it was ruined by someone and her efforts were for naught. She was so close. Sigh. Everyone shook their heads and sighed in unison at the sight of a perfect spirit regeneration elixir that was about to be born, dying just like that. Su Zimo's gaze turned cold. Because the spirit lion was not targeting him, his spirit perception did not react. Furthermore, he had not expected that the cultivators of True Fire Elixir Workshop would dare to allow the spirit lion to injure someone in front of everyone in the capital. Looking at Xiaoning, who was standing on the spot sobbing, Su Zimo's killing intent surged uncontrollably in his heart. Nian Qi, who was standing beside him, was the first to sense it. From Su Zimo, she felt a sense of trepidation that she had never felt before. Nian Qi glanced sideways and could not help but feel her heart skip a beat when she caught sight of Su Zimo's gaze. Nian Qi had seen that terrifying gaze once before. That was the same gaze that Su Zimo's eyes revealed when he faced the two perfected Jin Dan cultivators on that night half a year ago. It was cold, indifferent and calm like an ocean of nirvana. After pondering for a moment, Nian Qi retreated from the crowd silently. Looking around, she sped off not far away. Faced with this turn of events, Su Zimo was calm and did not appear right away, merely watching coldly from the sidelines. He was waiting. He was waiting for the reactions of the two factions. At that moment, the ones who should have reacted the most were the Scarlet Vulture guards that were patrolling not far away in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop behind Xiaoning. However, Su Zimo was disappointed. He had clearly seen the gazes of the two Scarlet Vulture guards land on this place. However, they paused for a moment before turning their heads away, choosing to ignore it. True Fire Elixir Workshop is really too much. That's right. They're clearly letting the lion cause trouble on purpose, and yet, they're still pretending to be innocent. In the crowd, a cultivator frowned and asked, "The Scarlet Vulture guards are not far away and seem to have already witnessed this. Why aren't they rushing over?" "You don't know about that, right?" An old man said. It's said that the commander of the Scarlet Vulture guards, perfected Jin Dan, who is nicknamed Vulture, Stayed in True Fire sect for a period of time and can be considered as half a disciple of True Fire sect. These Scarlet Vulture guards are all his subordinates and generally speaking, they'll have to give True Fire sect some face. Furthermore, this matter can be major or minor. Even if we pursue it, it'll most likely be left unsettled. Why do you say that? The spirit lion came out to cause trouble and knocked over the elixir furnace. He Xing and the others insisted that they did not discipline it properly, and caused the spirit lion to come out and hurt others. What can you do to them? Chapter 277. Just as the crowd had said, the Scarlet Vulture guards were clearly biased and chose to ignore everything that happened. A few cultivators from Azure Frost Elixir Workshop were furious, and were about to step forward to argue when they were stopped by the sharp gaze of the yellow-dressed woman and retreated helplessly. Most of the disciples from Azure Frost Elixir Workshop were indignant, but they did not dare to say anything because of the yellow-dressed woman's authority. Instinctively, Su Xiaoning turned back and saw the cold face of the yellow-dressed woman. The two factions that should have stood out chose to remain silent at that moment. In the middle of the crowd, Su Xiaoning looked lonely, helpless and lost. Done. Right then, He Xing, who was standing at the side, hollered softly. An elixir with a refreshing medicinal fragrance popped out of the elixir furnace and spun in midair. Everyone focused their gazes. There were 3 elixir patterns. A superior-grade spirit recovery elixir. Fufu. He Xing waved his hand gently and pinched the spirit recovery elixir between his fingers. Looking at Su Xiaoning, who was not far away, he chuckled and said leisurely, "Junior sister Su, you've lost? Senior brother, he is amazing. I'm guessing that senior brother, he only used 70% of his skills this time round. It's definitely less than 70%, 30% at most." The group of cultivators from True Fire Elixir Workshop boasted shamelessly, but the cheers from the surrounding crowd were sparse and sparse. No one was blind. Even though superior-grade elixirs were already rare, if not for the unforeseen event just now, Su Xiaoning would most likely have condensed a perfect elixir with 5 elixir patterns. In the end, it was clear who had won and who had lost. Now that He Xing had the cheek to say such words, everyone was wary. Even though they would not stand out, they could not help but scold him for being shameless in their hearts. "Junior sister Su, since you've lost, hand over the elixir furnace according to our initial agreement," He Xing said smugly with a smile. "I didn't lose." Su Xiaoning was fearless and did not back down as her voice was firm. The smile on He Xing's face froze for a moment before returning to normal. He continued smiling. "Junior sister Su, don't worry. Even though you've lost, I'll still pay double the price for that elixir furnace. I won't take advantage of you as long as you hand it over." "I didn't lose," Su Xiaoning repeated those 3 words. Instantly, He Xing's expression darkened. "Su Xiaoning, don't refuse a toast only to be forced. Because you went back on your word and went back on your word, affecting Azure Frost Alchemy Pavilion's reputation." Not only that, He Xing's words, he even's words. Su Xiaoning raised her head with a stubborn expression. She had no intention of yielding. "Xiaoning." Right then, the yellow-robed woman from Azure Frost Elixir Workshop stood out and said indifferently, "Hand that elixir furnace over to fellow Taoist He." Su Xiaoning was stunned. Her eyes filled with disbelief. Aza stirred to Su Xiaoning's. Su Zimo's gaze was dark as he watched everything quietly. "Su tu Xiaoning. Xiaoning?" Vulture Su ask. "To Su to you lose. Su disciple to you. Sect you disciple, but I didn't lose at all." If not for him, Su Xiaoning was about to defend herself when she was interrupted by the yellow-dressed woman. "I don't want you to listen to excuses. I only want the outcome. The outcome is that you've lost." There was a hint of sternness in the yellow-dressed woman's voice, and the coldness in her eyes intensified. Su Xiaoning's body swayed and her face turned incomparably pale. Just now, Su Xiaoning did not show any fear despite He Xing's overbearing attitude. But now, when her fellow sectmates chose to stand against her, Su Xiaoning's final pillar of support crumbled. The yellow-dressed woman looked at Su Xiaoning coldly and said in a deep voice, "Azure Frost sect and True Fire sect have always been on good terms. It's best that we don't affect our relationship because of you. Hand over the elixir furnace and apologize to fellow Taoist. He will let this matter rest. Apologize? Su Xiaoning smiled bitterly with mockery in her eyes. May I ask, Senior Sister Yang, what did I do wrong? How dare you disobey my orders? The yellow-dressed woman's expression darkened as she said sternly, don't think that you can be so brazen just because Yaoshua is backing you. Let me tell you, even if Yaoshua is back, I Yongyu have the final say in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop in the capital of Great Zhou, let alone the fact that Yaoshua isn't back yet. While others did not feel anything when they heard that, Su Zimo vaguely caught a few pieces of information. Firstly, Ji Yaoshua had yet to return to the capital. That was normal. There was still more than a month to the sect competition and most sects had yet to make a move. Secondly, this Yongyu must have a feud with Ji Yaoshua. Furthermore, Yongyu did not know of Ji Yaoshua's true identity. If Yongyu knew of Ji Yaoshua's true identity and still dared to be so arrogant, it could only mean that she was an idiot. Back when the two of them first met, Ji Yaoshua hid her surname and identity. That was indeed her style of doing things. Thirdly, the reason why Yongyu was against Xiaoning was most likely because of Ji Yaoshua. In Yongyu's eyes, the fact that Xiaoning was on good terms with Ji Yaoshua meant that Xiaoning was definitely her enemy. That was the reason why she kept making things difficult for Xiaoning. Su Xiaoning pursed her red lips tightly and bean-sized tears welled up in her eyes. However, they refused to fall. Slowly, Su Xiaoning took out an elixir furnace from her storage bag. The furnace was extremely small, and looked like it had been around for a long time. It was extremely old and was covered in mottled copper. Based on that alone, the elixir furnace was inconspicuous and there was nothing special about it. However, at that moment, Su Xiaoning's arm was injured and fresh blood dripped onto the bronze elixir furnace. After being stained by Su Xiaoning's blood, the elixir furnace suddenly emitted a divine light that shone brightly, causing everyone to gasp in shock. Immediately after, a faint medicinal fragrance wafted out from the elixir furnace. This time round, even a fool could tell that the elixir furnace was definitely a treasure. He Xing's eyes lit up and a flash of greed flashed through his eyes as he licked his lips. Back then, he could vaguely tell that the elixir furnace was similar to something described in an ancient book in True Fire sect. That was the reason why he pestered Su Xiaoning multiple times, wanting to buy the elixir furnace back. If they were outside the capital, He Xing would have long killed her and snatched the treasure. Now that he had a look, the elixir furnace was indeed no ordinary item, and there was a high chance that it was something described in the ancient book. At the thought of what was recorded in the ancient book, He Xing's heart burned and he was even more determined to get his hands on the elixir furnace at all costs. Yongyu looked at the elixir furnace in Su Xiaoning's hands and froze for a moment with a look of shock in her eyes. It was clear that she had not expected the elixir furnace to be a treasure. For a moment, a look of regret flashed through Yongyu's eyes. If she did not get Su Xiaoning to return the elixir furnace, given her authority in Azure Frost Elixir Workshop, she would most likely be able to get her hands on the elixir furnace. Under countless greedy gazes, Su Xiaoning felt as though she could be torn into pieces at any moment. She was terrified and helpless as her limbs turned cold. For some reason, a figure suddenly flashed through Su Xiaoning's mind. That figure wore green robes and was neither tall nor burly. However, he was able to shelter her from the wind and rain. At that moment, a gentle voice seemed to ring in Su Xiaoning's ears. Xiaoning, don't be afraid. Chapter 278. That figure appeared in her mind and that voice reverberated in the depths of her memories, causing Su Xiaoning to feel a sense of warmth. Immediately after, Su Xiaoning caught sight of someone. A man in green robes was walking over slowly. That figure did not look tall or burly. However, it gradually overlapped with the figure in Su Xiaoning's memories and became indistinguishable. When she saw that person, Su Xiaoning's mouth opened slightly and her petite body shuddered. Her eyes filled with disbelief. How could that be? How could that be? This must be a hallucination. Su Xiaoning could not believe it. She pulled up her sleeves and wiped away the tears in her eyes. Widening her eyes, she looked at the person who had arrived. Even though they had not met for a few years, the green-robed man's gaze was still as warm as before. Su Xiaoning covered her cherry lips with her petite hands, and her body shuddered slightly as her eyes were covered with a layer of mist once more. The green-robed man arrived before Su Xiaoning and smiled. Reaching out with his slender fingers, he wiped away the tears on Su Xiaoning's face gently and said gently, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." It was only at this moment that Su Xiaoning was truly certain that everything before her was not an illusion. Su Zimo had truly appeared. He did not descend from the skies, nor were there rainbow clouds, nor was there a massive commotion. There was only a single person, and yet, Su Xiaoning felt a long-awaited warmth. Su Xiaoning could no longer control herself and was speechless as tears gushed out. At that moment, all the grievances in her heart seemed to have found a place to vent, and she could vent them to her heart's content. "Who are you? This has nothing to do with you. Don't look for trouble." He Xing frowned and hollered at Su Zimo with a cold gaze. Su Zimo glanced sideways and glanced at He Xing indifferently. Su Zimo's gaze was calm as water without any ripples. However, for some reason, He Xing's heart skipped a beat. Su Zimo pointed to the elixir furnace in Xiaoning's hands and smiled. "Keep it. You didn't lose. Why should you give it to someone else?" "Yes." Su Xiaoning nodded her head solemnly. With a flip of her palm, she kept the elixir furnace back into her storage bag. She was unwilling to give in the end. But from the beginning to the end, no one helped her, not even a word. Even her fellow disciples from Azure Frost Elixir Workshop were forcing her to hand over her elixir furnace. At that moment, Su Xiaoning felt cold all over. She was lonely and helpless. Darkness filled her eyes and she could only bow her head and submit. But now, with Su Zimo standing beside her, she was filled with courage. She was not in the wrong in the first place, so why should she compromise? He Xing's face darkened as he said coldly, "Su Xiaoning, what do you mean by this? You want to go back on your word after losing?" Su Xiaoning said, "He Xing, let me repeat myself. I did not lose. Just now everyone here clearly saw what happened. You know it yourself. I have a clear conscience." Su Xiaoning's words were resolute and decisive. Su Zimo nodded secretly as a look of appreciation flashed across his eyes. Over the past few years of cultivation in Azure Frost sect, Xiaoning's temperament had become much stronger. "Does that mean that you're being shameless?" He Xing clenched his fists tightly with a ferocious glint in his eyes. Su Zimo turned around and strode before He Xing, asking expressionlessly, "This is the Great Zhou dynasty, right under the emperor's feet. What are you trying to do?" "Ha ha ha ha." He Xing burst into laughter with a mocking look in his eyes. Pointing at Su Zimo, he said, "You're still way too naive." "Oh." Su Zimo raised his brow slightly. He Xing laughed sinisterly. "Indeed, I don't dare to kill anyone here. However, do you believe that the Scarlet Vulture guards won't care if I slap you a few times right now and embarrass you?" When they heard that, everyone shook their heads and sighed internally. This was completely taking advantage of their power to bully others. He Xing slapped Su Zimo a few times. After all, no one died and the Scarlet Vulture guards would turn a blind eye. However, if Su Zimo dared to resist, the Scarlet Vulture guards would definitely step in. At that time, the one who would suffer would definitely be Su Zimo. When he heard He Xing's words, Su Zimo's expression was calm as he replied calmly, "You don't dare to kill, but I do. Do you believe that I'll kill you if you dare to lay a finger on me?" The moment he said that, the crowd was in an uproar. Tit for tat. What did the green-robed man mean by that? How dare he threaten to kill someone in the Great Zhou dynasty right under the emperor's feet? This person was either a lunatic or he was spouting nonsense. "Fufu, are you trying to scare me?" After a brief silence, He Xing suddenly laughed. He Xing could tell that Su Zimo was only at late-stage foundation establishment, the same as him. Notwithstanding the fact that Su Zimo did not dare to attack, even if this person did not care about his life and attacked him, He Xing would be able to retreat immediately. At that time, the Scarlet Vulture guards would step in and suppress this person. At that thought, He Xing reached out and sneered, slapping Su Zimo viciously on the face. At the same time, Su Zimo attacked as well. It was the exact same action and posture. However, Su Zimo's speed was much faster than He Xing's. He Xing merely used his palm, whereas Su Zimo's arm seemed to be spinning a gigantic millstone, arriving instantly with a chilling killing intent. An evil gust of wind blew. He Xing could not dodge at all. The aura of death engulfed him, almost suffocating him. He Xing had miscalculated something. At this distance there was no way he could escape once Su Zimo attacked. Bang! Su Zimo's palm slapped He Xing's face heavily, letting out a dull thud. Poof! Right in front of countless gazes, He Xing's massive head was smashed apart by Su Zimo's palm. Brains splattered and blood flowed. He Xing's headless body was still standing on the spot, convulsing intentionally or unintentionally. Instantly the crowd went silent. Everyone's eyes widened as they looked at this scene in disbelief. Even though Su Zimo had already made his threat just now, no one expected him to really attack. Furthermore, he was so decisive in killing without leaving any room for negotiation. It felt as though the green-robed cultivator had found a random reason to kill He Xing. As the elixir refinement master with the most potential among the younger generation of True Fire sect, just now, he was still in high spirits and looked down on everyone. But in the blink of an eye, he was killed by a green-robed cultivator of unknown origins and turned into a headless corpse. Everything had happened too quickly. Everyone looked at Su Zimo as though they were looking at a dead man. If it was just a fight, the Scarlet Vulture Guards would at most chase the wrong party out of the capital. However, if someone died, the murderer would have to pay with his life. That was also the reason why, even with the Scarlet Vulture Guards backing him, He Xing admitted that he did not dare to kill anyone in the capital. Murder! A scream sounded from the crowd. Not far away, two Scarlet Vulture Guards caught sight of what happened and their eyes flashed with disbelief. They were momentarily stunned before hollering and charging over on their spirit eagles with a murderous aura, wielding their halberds. Everyone from True Fire Weapon Refinement Pavilion was filled with killing intent. Peng Ming said coldly, "Lad, you're finished. No one can save you today." Beside him, the spirit lion lowered its body and roared at Su Zimo as well. Su Zimo's gaze was cold as he said indifferently, "Think about yourself first."